Chapter 80. Second update. If Mount Longhu was the capital of immortals, then Xianxia Academy was the city of saints. With the end of the Spring and Autumn War of the Nine Nations, the scene of hundreds of schools contending no longer existed in the academy. However, the spirit of equal academic attainment was still passed down. Generally speaking, in the magnificent Xianxia Academy, except for the forest of merits that only the chancellor could enter, one could go anywhere and read all kinds of books. However, some unwritten rules had been deeply rooted for thousands of years. These rules were not established by generations of chancellors. Most of them were due to the great reputation of a certain grand scholar in the academy. The younger generation followed the rules out of respect. For example, Xianxia Academy had a great lake that planted countless green lotuses. The lake was not deep, only 2 people deep. One could see the bottom clearly. The branches and roots of the green lotuses could be seen clearly. Sailing on the lake was like a floating boat in the sky, like a fairyland. Ordinary scholars of the academy did not dare to come to Great Lake to admire the green lotuses. Firstly, it was the place where Huang Longshi became famous. Secondly, a lady lived in a loft by the lake. For the past 5 to 6 years, the limelight of Xianxia Academy had been stolen by her alone. When she first stepped into the academy to study, she showed the advantage of her family background. She was directly apprenticed to Chancellor Wang and a military leader. Both of them taught her everything they knew. Some people were not convinced and came to Great Lake to provoke her. This lady who brought a sword into the academy did not argue with them. She directly pulled out her sword and cut off the hair of the leading scholar. The second time, the battle formation was even greater. She pulled out her sword and killed one on the spot without saying anything. Although she was grounded by the academy, no one dared to provoke her. This lady who was not very good-looking was capable of killing people. Later on, she founded the Zongjing 19 Paths and it was widely spread. Later on, she commented on the achievements of the world scholars. Compared to people who played the 10 divisions on Great Lake, there were half praise and half criticism. In recent years, many scholars from various countries who came to study in Xianxia came for her. Regardless of how much criticism she attracted, the biggest fact was that how many people in the world could be criticized by her? There were only a handful. Don't be fooled by the scholars and poets outside the palace who scolded the most fiercely. The young men who had played the 10 bureaus with her had already seen through her. Those who scolded the most fervently would definitely turn the fastest when facing her. Their character was like wild grass, bending over and over again. The loft by Great Lake did not show the style of a noble family. It was made by the academy's craftsmen with mechanisms and spiritual qi. Outside the building were some chickens and ducks, separated by a few vegetable gardens, all of which were used to fill the stomach. There was not the slightest bit of elegance of the old students raising geese, cranes, chrysanthemums, and plum flowers. This was Su Weisheng. Today, Su Weisheng had finished listening to the lecture and returned to the building to have a self-sufficient lunch. Then, he began to write the 1,000-character classic of warning. He first wrote it in Bailiang Palace. At first, he had nothing to do. Since he had a brother who was always idling around, he wanted to write a piece to admonish him. Later, he saw that it had no effect at all, so he put it aside. Later on, when he went to Xianxia Academy, he picked up the brush again and wrote a few sentences about his comprehension of the 1,000-character classic every now and then. There were already more than 600 words in the 1,000-character classic. When the first 70 or 80 words were read, it was very enlightening. The family had been prosperous for generations. A clan accumulates merit and benevolence, repaying it back in 100 years. A country values its people more than its monarch, never declining for 1,000 years. How to die prematurely, how to speak unkind words, how to do unkind deeds, how to be unkind, how to be unkind, how to be unkind. How sinister, 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 how sinister. Today I wrote, how to be armed with a sword, a gentleman is firm and unyielding, while a villain takes risks. How to drown oneself in a river, men are short-sighted, while women are arrogant. When he wrote this, Su Weisheng was stunned for a moment. He smiled slightly and his thoughts surged, but his brush did not stop. How to die of sudden speed, how to be hollowed out by lust, how to die of poisonous sores, how to be greasy. On the contrary, Su Weisheng snorted coldly and the tip of the brush paused. Therefore, the last hook of the word, greasy, was particularly dense and dignified, full of sharpness. It seemed that he was thinking of his annoying brother? Su Weisheng was in a bad mood. He put down the brush and walked out of the attic. He untied the rope of the lonely boat and sailed on the lake alone. The lake rippled. There was only one person and one boat on such a big lake. If it were not for the thousands of green lotuses, it would indeed be a bit lonely. She lay in the boat and raised her wrist. There was a piece of ink that was drilled through with a string. This piece was just an ordinary cobblestone, which suited Su Weisheng's hobby. Other than the ancient sword that could cut iron like mud, she did not have any other precious items. Her brush and ink were the same as the scholars of the palace. The only difference was that her diet was not good. If she did not rely on her own talent and domineering aura to monopolize this lake, one would not be able to tell that Su Weisheng was a princess. Moreover, how could a princess be compared to a princess? Even the daughter of assassin Yen could compete with her? She was not even fit to carry her shoes. Su Weisheng used the sunlight to look at the rings of light emitted by the chess piece. He was dazzled. Far away by the lakeside, two people were sneakily squatting behind the green lotuses and whispering to each other. One of them had a boneless head, a sunken nose and exposed teeth. No matter how one looked at it, he looked like a short-lived person who had died early and reincarnated. He said with a troubled expression, "Junior brother, are you really going to senior sister Su? She is someone who can kill." The other person was elegant and had an extraordinary temperament. When he smiled, he was especially handsome and flirtatious. He said indifferently, "Senior brother Lu, look carefully. Senior sister did not bring her sword today." Chapter 81. The man who looked like he was destined to have a rough life became even more miserable. He advised in a trembling voice, "Little junior brother, you haven't been in the academy for long. You can't make senior sister Su unhappy. The first day I entered the academy, I saw with my own eyes how senior sister Su killed people with her sword. So when I met the teacher and the other senior brothers and sisters, my legs went soft." The handsome man who had just studied with the same teacher as this timid senior brother joked, "Senior brother Lu, do you have 2 legs or 3 legs?" Senior brother Lu's face was full of righteousness. He thought carefully and then answered in a deep voice, 3 legs. The little junior brother, whose appearance was hundreds of times better than his senior brother, laughed and said, "Senior brother, if I can board senior sister Su's boat, you can call me senior brother in the future. How about that?" Senior brother Lu nodded without hesitation and said, "No problem." The junior brother was the talented youth who had played 10 games with Su Weisheng. Even if the chessboard did not have 19 pieces, he was not unhappy at all. He had thought that he had an 80% chance of winning on 19 pieces, but when Su Weisheng brought out 15 pieces, he was only pleasantly surprised. This was his eccentric nature. Face and whatnot could not be sold for a few taels of silver. As long as he won the 10 games, he would not touch 19 pieces even if he was beaten to death. He would not even touch a chess piece for the rest of his life. No matter how invincible Su Weisheng's chess skills were in the future, what could he do? Wouldn't it only make him more invincible? Unfortunately, he could not even beat Su Weisheng with 15 chess pieces. But he was still very happy. It was good that he did not lose or win. He had a reason to stay in the academy. Based on his style, it seemed that there was nothing in the world that was not worth being happy about. He dove into the lake like a fish and approached the small boat. Senior brother Lu was dumbfounded. He did not care about the bet. He only said what would happen if the little junior brother won, but did not mention what would happen if he lost. Little junior brother is really bold. None of the senior brothers in the academy dared to pester senior sister Su. Senior brother Lu stared at him intently, ready to save him at any time. At the center of the lake, Su Weisheng frowned and pulled back his wrist. He subconsciously wanted to press down on Hong Yi, but when he discovered that he did not have a sword with him, He stood up and uprooted a green lotus. With lightning speed, he stabbed the fish that was a little too large to the bottom of the lake. When Su Weisheng saw that there was no movement, he said calmly, "Don't do it again." Senior brother Lu, who was peeking out from behind a pile of lotus leaves, was even more nervous than the two in the game. He was afraid that senior sister and junior brother would start a fight at the slightest disagreement. This Great Mind Lake was a rare quiet place in the academy. Everywhere else, there were many students of Jixia Academy who were talking loudly. There were also lunatics who jumped off buildings, jumped into the water, and even ran around naked. To senior brother Lu, who used a normal heart to do normal things and write normal articles, this was really unacceptable. So when he occasionally heard that senior sister Su had defeated those lunatics, blind, and deaf who were unwilling to cultivate diligently, he secretly felt quite satisfied. As for the mysterious junior brother, he did not have many interactions with him, but they were not shallow. Senior brother Lu quite liked this outstanding talent who spoke and acted without restraint. Senior brother Lu stared with his eyes wide open as he saw junior brother swimming away. At this moment, his stomach was facing up as he leisurely swam back, looking like he was still glorious even though he had lost. Climbing ashore, junior brother who had a bump on his head chuckled, "Grand Chancellor nagged me last time about only allowing dogs in the water and not being able to look at free and unfettered people. I think that's bullshit." Senior brother Lu said in a panic, "Junior brother, be careful, be careful." Junior brother did not mind. After standing up straight, he shook lightly to shake off more than half of the lake water on his body. He turned his head to look at the woman who had left the boat and come ashore. His eyes were filled with undisguised adoration, but there was no fear or worship in the eyes of ordinary scholars. Senior brother Lu said worriedly, "Junior brother, be careful not to catch a cold." Junior brother put his arm around the shoulder of his most compatible senior brother from the same sect and smiled. "Senior brother Lu, when are you going to the capital? Let's go to the highest hall of martial heroes in the imperial city to admire the moon." Senior brother Lu smiled. "How can I?" But he didn't dare to. Junior brother said shamelessly, "There are many connections in the capital. With senior brother Lu's looks, it wouldn't be hard for you to casually marry a princess or princess. I'll be the matchmaker for you. When the time comes, you'll climb up Hall of Martial Heroes, then Hall of Literary Splendor, and Hall of Preserving Harmony." Senior brother Lu touched his face and nodded. "It's indeed a way." Su Weisheng entered the building alone. She did not have any thoughts about what had happened in the lake. That young man's background was treacherous. She had 15 paths as a lake and 10 rounds with him. That was because of her arrogance, but it did not mean that Su Weisheng really liked her. When he had broken the rules and passed the examinations of several teachers to enter the academy, he had also entered her unhindered arcane gate. Su Weisheng had increased her vigilance a bit. Su Weisheng could be unbridled in Jiangnan province, using his father's tiger skin as a banner to abuse his power. His actions were dissolute and disregarded the consequences. Su Weisheng was not that useless flower vase. Every step she took, she had to consider the Su family. She could not make a single mistake. She was also not that silly little brother Su Longxiang, who could not think too much about anything. She had originally thought that a certain guy could be a bit more promising. Who would have thought that it would be fine if he did not learn the way of the king, but he also did not learn the way of the tyrant. He did not even touch the art of war. He also lacked interest in the art of court maneuvering. He actually picked up the saber to learn martial arts. Bailiang had millions of households, 300,000 Bailiang cavalry. Such a large and glorious family business, second only to the emperor, could be supported by a saber? Su Weisheng stared at the chess piece on her wrist and scolded in a low voice, "You idiot." After Su Weisheng scolded her, her mood relaxed a bit. However, she quickly became serious again. 2 fingers stroked the chess piece. She sneered and said, "You're even more arrogant than a prince." This was because she remembered what her father had said in the secret letter after investigating that little brother. This child's background was hidden and could not be investigated. He only knew that the head of the inner palace's 30,000 eunuchs, Han Diaosi, had to bow when seeing him. Chapter 82. Blind Old Su was an old soldier of northern Liang. He was originally a crossbowman, but after being shot in the eye by a stray arrow, he became a cavalryman. His battle record was mediocre, so he really couldn't show off his head in the northern Liang army, where he exchanged his head for meritorious service. Before he retired, he didn't have much money left. Old Su was a native of Jinzhou, Liaodong. He had been alone since he was young. He followed Su Shao of the Pillar State from Jinzhou to Liaoxi, and then from Liaoxi to Xiongqian Pass, and then to the Central Plains. During the Spring and Autumn War, many old soldiers who joined the army at the same time as Old Su, as long as they didn't die, they all became officers or captains. Before they retired, they could even receive the title of Deputy Commandant of Zhaowu. Therefore, although Old Su was an old soldier, he wasn't a fierce soldier. Those who didn't dare to tie their heads to their waistbands to fight for scholarly honor and could still earn official positions were only the children of wealthy families. Old Su was a veteran who couldn't be said to be greedy for life, but was absolutely afraid of death. It was already considered very lucky that he didn't have his head chopped off by the Inspector General. Later on, Old Su's remaining eye was also blind. He was careless when he went up the mountain to burn charcoal, so he became the blind Old Su that people in and out of the alleys talked about. The most unlucky one was that after Old Su became blind, when it rains, it pours. He was careless and didn't manage to avoid the hooves of a fine horse in the downtown area, so he was trampled into a cripple. When the group of fine young men saw the old man rolling on the ground, they just laughed loudly. Blind Old Su originally wanted to clench his teeth and fight, but when he touched the carrying pole on the ground, he heard voices saying that those young masters were the sons of some military commandant, the grandsons of some literary scholar in the capital, and the grandsons of the crown prince's horse washer. Old Su threw away the carrying pole and cried like a child, howling over and over again that he should have died long ago. It made people's scalps go numb, and even some of the pitiful onlookers were scared away. One dandy disliked Old Su's chatter and pulled out his sword to chop him down. Bailiang people had always been valiant. Even those dandy might only have enough strength to untie the belt of a courtesan, but as long as they could pull out a sword, they could definitely chop him down. This made many dandy who had just entered Bailiang feel very uncomfortable. If that sword had chopped down on Old Su's head at that time, His Royal Highness wouldn't be carrying the green ant wine today. At that time, Su Fengnian happened to be passing by. His horse was far more robust than that group of third-rate dandies, so his arrogance was 100 times more unbridled. He didn't want to get involved in this mess, but he was hooked by Old Su's heart-wrenching words. My legs weren't broken by those bastards from West Chu, but they were crippled by my own people. God, your mother is as blind as I am. Su Fengnian didn't say anything and just let the evil slaves disperse that group of bastards. As for the broken arms and legs of those pampered young masters, how could His Royal Highness care? If they had the ability, they should just drag their families to the prince's mansion and ask Su Shao for compensation. It would be best if they went with an imperial edict. Later on, Old Su didn't die. For some reason, he was taken to get his legs treated. However, how could an old man's legs withstand the force of the horse's hooves? They were completely broken. Just as the blind Old Su was about to sit in a small thatched hut by the riverside and wait for death, someone suddenly came from the yamen and said that he would be given a tael of silver every month. Old Su trembled in fear. After receiving the money for half a year, he finally mustered up the courage to ask that official. The official said that this was a new rule in Bailiang's army to treat the old soldiers well. Later on, Old Su asked an old fellow who was also half dead and learned that this was true. However, they all needed to go to the yamen to receive the money. Old Su was puzzled. Good people get good karma? But no matter how you look at it, I don't think I'm a good person. When I was young, I burned, killed, and looted a lot with the Pillar State. Old Su's legs were broken, but he could still barely walk with the help of his self-made crutches. The thatched hut had been repaired by the yamen's high-ranking official. Every year, before winter, a thick quilt would be sent over. Old Su managed the vegetable garden quite well, and a tael of silver would be worth 1,000 copper coins. Old Su wasn't picky with his food, so he could still buy some meat wine with the spare money at the end of the month. He was living a good life. Today, old Su was sitting on a wooden stool outside the hut and dozing off when he heard a loud voice shout, Old Su, let's drink. I caught a duck for you in the river on the way. It's really fat. Chapter 83. Old Su's spirit was lifted. That Su kid was here. He had met this kid 4 or 5 years ago. It was said that he was caught climbing the wall to watch a girl bathe and was chased to the riverside. He then borrowed old Su's thatched cottage to hide. It could be said that they had formed a decent relationship. Old Su knew that the pretty daughter of a humble family in Lanting Tavern was a pretty girl from a humble family. Although he couldn't see, old Su's ears were good. He could always hear some wild men gathering together and drooling over her when they had nothing to do. They were all saying that the little girl's chest had become heavier over the years, her little round face had become sharper, and she was becoming more and more beautiful. Old Su had gone to the tavern to buy distiller's grains and smelled the fragrance on the girl's body. Tsk, it smelled really good. It was comparable to Lanting Tavern's signature green plum wine. Back then, Su kid was chased and beaten for her. He wasn't wronged. If old Su was a few decades younger, would Su kid even have the chance to climb the wall? He would be more like a lookout for him. The pot is in the same place in the house. Remember not to throw the duck into the river when you pluck its feathers. Be careful that the moment you leave, my thatched cottage will be torn down. Old Su took the wine pot and sniffed it. He smiled contentedly and said, This green ant can't compare to the green plum from Lanting Tavern, but it's still much better than distiller's grains. The customer stuffed the broken duck into old Su's arms and said angrily, Do I have to pluck its feathers? I'll go boil some water. Now that old Su had wine in his hand, he was easy to talk to. He leaned on his walking stick and went to pluck the duck's feathers. Not long after, the thatched cottage was filled with a fragrance. Old Su chewed on a greasy duck leg and asked with a smile, Su kid, I haven't seen you for more than a year. You've either been missing for 3 years or haven't been heard from for an entire year. What do you do for a living? Listen to old Su's advice. Don't do anything outrageous. It's fine if you peek at a girl bathing since you won't lose anything. But if you play with knives and guns, it's hard to say. Let's not talk about this. Even if I did, you probably wouldn't listen to my advice. I know I can't drink your wine for free. Tell me, what do you want to hear this time? At my age, old Su can't speak more than a few times, so I'll tell you as much as I can. The man chewed on the duck meat and said with a smile, Let's talk about Liaodong. My ancestors lived there, in Jinzhou. The only one who could stroll around so idly was naturally His Royal Highness, Su Fengnian. Old Su laughed and said, How could I not be familiar with Jinzhou? The whole of Liaodong is the same. Although 9 out of 10 military governors claim to be poor in front of the imperial court, they are not poor at all. The only poor ones are people like us who don't have land. We are just short of rebelling. Su Fengnian frowned and asked, According to the law, isn't every soldier given 40 mu of farmland? Liaodong is worthy of being called a dangerous place in our dynasty. The plain and the wilderness stretches as far as the eye can see for 1,000 li. It is difficult to defend. If we abandon it, Beimeng will drive straight in, and the northern part of the country will not be restricted by any gate or court. Therefore, if Liaodong is safe, the central plains will not be disturbed. If Liaodong is disturbed, the golden drums of the world will resound together. Revolt? I haven't heard of any disturbances in Liaodong these years. Old Su sneered and said, Su kid, you know fart. I, old Su, don't understand your literary words. Which scholar did you hear it from? I only know that when I left Liaodong, Liaodong had 21 guards, while Liaoxi only had 6 guards. Not to mention Liaoxi, the 21 guards of Liaodong stored 1 million share of grain a year. How many share of grain fell into our pockets? Su kid, think about it, not to mention the viceroy of Liaodong, the military governor 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 of Liaodong. These big shots, even some 7th rank, 8th rank officials have to do some shady business, such as relocating the army and changing the channels. If they did not specialize in water conservancy and occupy the fertile land, where would they get the money to show filial piety to the higher-ups? In those days, the Great Pillar State was in charge of the whole of Liaodong. which was a rare blessing for the two Liao people. As soon as the Great Pillar State left, who cared about the life and death of the soldiers? A lot of border troops were sent to Liaodong because of their crimes. Otherwise, who would be willing to go to Liaodong, this bitter and cold place to live? Once they went there, who would really think that there would be fields and grain? I, a Jianzhou native, don't even have half a piece of land, let alone these outsiders. Su Fengnian chuckled and said, that won't cause any rebellion. Liaodong is poor, they're used to suffering. As long as there's even half a mouthful of rice to eat, nobody would be willing to start an uprising. Old Su sighed. If we don't really want to starve to death, who would be willing to go against life? But if this goes on, it's really hard to say what will happen in Liaodong. I've left Jinzhou for nearly 30 years, I've endured for 30 years. Since ancient times, Liaodong had been the land of 100 battles. As the saying goes, the tiger steps like a dragon, the superior is in the heart. The safety of the world was always related to the two Liao. Su Shao advised that they would not hesitate to use all the strength of the world to protect it, but from top to bottom, very few people were willing to take it seriously. This was not to say that nobody could see the stakes, it was just that the world's situation was temporarily settled. What would happen 50 or 100 years later? What benefit would it bring to the current official position? Su Fengnian said softly, Old Su, tell me more about the local customs and customs of Liaodong. Old Su spilled beans from a bamboo tube. By the time the pot of stewed duck was finished, Old Su was also very tired, but most of his energy was used to deal with the duck meat. In the end, Old Su wiped his mouth and said, when the Great Pillar State entered Bailiang, it was really awe-inspiring. What does the princess consort's poem say? Su Fengnian smiled and said, the Green Ox Road is on 1,000 mounts. The children under its banner hold mulberries. Old Su leaned on his walking stick with a fascinated expression. Su Fengnian left the wine pot and quietly walked out of the thatched hut. Blue Bird stood in the distance, watching His Royal Highness slowly walk over. Every time he came to the thatched hut by the river, she accompanied him, and she never asked why His Highness was dealing with a blind old soldier. When Su Fengnian saw Bluebird's cold face, his eyes were a little absent-minded. Back then, when the blind old Su was in the 1,000 mounts, his legs had not been broken. That child still held the mulberries and raised his head to ask his mother if they tasted good. Bluebird was a little confused by his gaze. Su Fengnian suddenly bit her cheek and said with a smile, delicious, it tastes like mulberries. Chapter 84. While walking through the fields and crisscrossing paths, Su Fengnian casually asked, why doesn't Sweet Potato like to leave the prince's mansion? Why do you like to run out every 2 to 3 days? Bluebird replied in a methodical manner, she's a bit lazy. Su Fengnian jumped up and asked, Su Shao clearly knows that this time, Zhang Julu is in power, reorganizing the imperial court and adjusting the border army. Since the beginning of last year, he has been clearing up Liaodong's land. The path has been bumpy, no less than 10 geography department officials have died from assassinations, the number of people who asked for leave even more so reaching 30. However, Zhang Julu still found out that Liaodong's governor Bai Huai, guardian eunuch Lu Taiping, Yuji General Fu Han, chief commander, and more than 10 others forcefully seized the land, at most 600 hectares, at least several dozen hectares. Even though quite a few of these people came from Bailiang's old military departments, 20 years have already passed. Why is Su Shao still joining in the fun, insisting on challenging Grand Secretary Zhang? Isn't this going against the general trend? Moreover, even though Su Shao says that he wants the imperial court to build the two Liao into a boulder, those fattest vermin, half of them are related to him, no one would believe these words. Tell me, what exactly do you think Su Shao is thinking? How could Bluebird dare to answer this type of question? Su Fengnian didn't expect to get an answer either, only asking would make his heart feel a bit more comfortable. The two Liao soldiers grumbling about the lax civil administration and other things, these weren't things that His Royal Highness was interested in. For example, on Bailiang's side, their military equipment was the most majestic under the heavens, there wasn't any exaggeration, but if one were to talk about Bailiang's peaceful ways, perhaps even Su Shao himself would blush. If de Zhuguo was a moral saint, then the Lingzhou prefecture magistrate would not need to go to the capital and implicate the daughter of Beiliang's grand scholar to become a canary with an uncertain future. Su Fengnian felt a burst of anger when he thought of this and how the four evils of Beiliang had separated and severed their ties with each other. In the end, only the bastardly Han Lin remained in Beiliang. He sat down on the soil by the edge of the field and said in a muffled voice with a dark face, "Blue Bird, help me have some fun." Blue Bird calmly said, "Spiced beef." Su Fengnian stood up and said with a smile, "Blue Bird still understands me." The two of them, who were master and servant but did not act like master and servant, walked for a while before sitting in a grand and beautiful carriage. The decorations of the carriage were secondary. Most importantly, the two colorful horses themselves were worth thousands of taels of gold. In the dynasty, no matter which province it was, the most direct way was to see the wealth of a hedonistic son and the price of the horses. Of course, there were some idiots who would puff themselves up at their own cost. They would buy a pair of famous horses like the white cranes of the Chow family to keep up appearances. However, His Royal Highness's green elephants of Great Wan were priceless and had always been an A-grade tribute. Only Su Fengnian dared to ride them. If it were any other descendant of a vassal king, they would not dare to take them out to show off. Su Fengnian entered the spiced beef shop and saw a familiar scene that he had not seen for a long time. The shop owner, old merchant, was busy with his business while Miss Jia was sitting on the stairs in a daze. She was holding a green bamboo branch between her fingers and slowly twirling it. Old merchant loved his distant relative's daughter dearly. No matter how the shop was doing, he did not want her to help. It could be assumed that the childless old merchant treated her as his own daughter. After all parents had the same heart. The little girl's name was very interesting. Her surname was Jia and her given name was Marrying Family. What was more interesting was the big cat that she led when she entered the city. It was a pity that it had not appeared in the past 2 years. It was unknown whether it was lost or dead. Blue Bird went to get the beef from the shopkeeper. Naturally, she would take it. Did she need to buy it? In Beiliang, whatever His Royal Highness wanted, there was no such thing as buying, stealing, robbing, or borrowing. He would just take it. Su Fengnian walked to the stairs and asked with a smile, miss, where's your big cat? Is it gone? Do you want me to give you one and you can come with me to the prince's mansion to play?" The young girl nicknamed Miss Haha by Su Fengnian had always been ignorant of the ways of the world. In the past, she dared to stare at Li Hanlin, the big dandy, in the shop. She was also indifferent to His Royal Highness and did not have much fear of him. However, she seemed a little strange today. When she saw Su Fengnian, she subconsciously shifted her butt. It was probably because she saw His Royal Highness kill someone with a knife at the corner of the alley last time. She seemed a little absent-minded these days. With Su Fengnian's cautious personality, he had already ordered people to keep an eye on this place for some time. As for why Miss Jia was nicknamed Miss Haha, there was a story behind it. It was said that this girl did not like to laugh. At most, she would laugh a few times with an expressionless face. Once to express amusement, twice to express amusement. Until now, no one had heard of it. Su Fengnian saw that she did not move. A one-man show was always boring, so he awkwardly turned around to find a seat. The shop was empty in an instant. Old merchant's wrinkled old face squeezed out a smile as he stood beside the table in a flattering manner. In fact, there was nothing for him to do. Blue Bird had already arranged everything. The bowls and chopsticks were brought down from the carriage. The ivory chopsticks, the jade porcelain bowl, and the marinated beef were all neatly cut with a small silver knife and piled neatly in the bowl. Su Fengnian did not use the chopsticks. He grabbed a few slices and stuffed them into his mouth. This was the taste he wanted. It was rich but not greasy. The sauce was authentic, but it did not cover up the original taste of good beef. After Su Fengnian finished the beef, he leaned back on the chair as if he was about to fall asleep. He closed his eyes and lowered his eyelids. His tongue touched the roof of his mouth and his knees together. He gently knocked his teeth 36 times. His qi returned to his Xian acupoint and his breathing was natural. The shop owner, old merchant, did not know what was going on. He only thought that His Royal Highness was a little tired and did not dare to flatter him blindly. He only hoped that he was not dissatisfied with today's beef. Su Fengnian's breathing was abnormally stable. Just like the so-called true essence of Buddhism was nothing more than eating, drinking, and defecating, the Heart Sutra of the Su Fengnian was ultimately an unremarkable skill of breathing. When Su Fengnian could listen to a person's heartbeat, he would be able to ascend to the second level of the 6 heavenly pavilions. Su Fengnian suddenly turned his head and looked towards the stairs. He only saw the young girl staring at the bamboo stick in her hand with a pair of lifeless eyes. Su Fengnian stood up and smiled. "Old merchant, give me 2 more portions." Old merchant's face was full of joy as he said, "All right, I'll go right away." Su Fengnian did not have to wait for long before Bluebird took the 2 portions of cooked beef. Returning to the carriage, Su Fengnian lifted the curtain and looked at old merchant who was still bowing at the entrance of the shop. He frowned and said, "There seems to be something wrong." Bluebird shook her head and said, "This person's background is clean. He's just an ordinary merchant." Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile. Old merchant returned to the shop and wiped the sweat from his forehead. For a while, there would be no customers in the shop. He took the time to sit down and rest. He massaged his waist and sighed when he saw the young girl still sitting on the stairs. It was fine that this little girl was freeloading in the shop, but she did not even smile in front of His Royal Highness and the others. If she was his biological daughter, he would definitely scold and beat her. The young girl left the shop with the bamboo stick and went straight out of the city. She walked slowly. It was already dusk when she left the city. After walking for another 2 hours, she walked into the lush green Mount Biweng. It seemed that she did not intend to return to the city. Bailiang had always been under a strict curfew. She was not His Royal Highness and could enter and leave the city at night as she pleased. Was a girl going to spend the night in the mountains? Mount Biweng was full of wild beasts. The deeper they went, even hunters had to form groups before they dared to travel at night. After walking for an unknown period of time, the young girl still walked on the lonely mountain path with a straight face. The full moon was in the sky. There were no traces of the path under her feet, but she was still walking. She came to the edge of a pool and bent down to drink some water. She was only 30% full. A strange sound came from the dense forest behind her, startling a few jackdaws. The young girl stood up and looked at the dense forest. A black bear that was perhaps half as tall as her rushed out, stomping on the ground until it shook. It stopped in front of the young girl and let out a roar. Its fangs were exposed, and its mouth was full of filth as it sprayed the young girl's face. Her black hair was blown up by the wind. The young girl still had a straight face and was indifferent. The giant bear seemed to be annoyed by this young prey and opened its mouth to bite her. An even more powerful earthquake came from the dense forest. When the grizzly bear turned its head, it was its turn to be sprayed with saliva by a bloody mouth. The grizzly bear's fur stood on end, and it was so scared that it did not dare to move. In recent years, in Mount Biweng, hunters would be able to pick up the bones of some large beasts every once in a while, including tigers and bears. They really couldn't figure out what else could occupy the mountain like this. Mountain ghosts? Demons and monsters? The answer was here. A big cat, that was even larger and more majestic than the grizzly bear, lowered its head and roared at the little grizzly bear. The little girl finally spoke. Hee. Chapter 85. First update. Su Fengnian was in a good mood on the way back home. The 2 extra servings of marinated beef were for the maids in Wutong Garden. Unsurprisingly, Jiang and I was still waiting in the courtyard. This little money grubber, regardless of wind or rain, would read 100,000 words of secret manuals every day. She would not stop until she had earned 100 taels of silver. Every time she made a mistake, she would deduct 10 won and read an extra cross on the 100,000 words. Today, Su Fengnian sneaked out to meet the blind old Su and left Jiang and I hanging in Wutong Garden. When they met later, she would roll her eyes. Su Fengnian entered the courtyard. Sweet Potato, who had been waiting for a long time, handed over a letter from Mount Longhu. It was written by the old Daoist Zhao Shituan. He had Bluebird distribute the beef and walked into the study alone with the letter. Jiang and I crouched in a corner with a hibernating dragon fist manual and quietly read. Only when Su Fengnian sat down did she wake up. She quickly stood up with a face full of anger and resentment. Su Fengnian opened the letter and sat on a red sandalwood chair with auspicious clouds. He smiled and said, "Since you have waited for half a day, you can read it later. Let me finish reading this letter." Jiang and I did not have the awareness of being under someone else's roof and calmly said, "Today, one word is 2 wen." Su Fengnian did not pay attention to her and only focused on reading the letter. Jiang and I watched as His Royal Highness's face changed from sunny to gloomy, then to stormy, and finally to dark clouds. For a moment, she forgot to repeat that one word was worth 2 wen. Su Fengnian raised his hand and was about to slap the sandalwood handle, but as soon as he did, he pulled back 80 to 90% of his strength. He managed to pull back his hand in time and did not smash the chair. Even so, his face was still frighteningly gloomy. Su Fengnian stood up and walked to the window. After a few breaths, he turned around and looked at Jiang and I with a smile. "Come, you read while I listen." Jiang and I finished reading Hidden Dragon and then read more than half of a sword manual. Outside the window, it was already deep into the night. She discovered that Su Fengnian was unusually quiet today. Su Fengnian, who had been absent-mindedly listening to the sound of reading for 4 hours, smiled and said, "Now that you've saved a lot of money with me, why don't we make another deal? If you buy a secret manual for 1,000 coins, you can buy 10 books in a year. Even if you can't practice martial arts, you can just throw a few books to the people of Jianghu. Do you think they won't bite you like a mad dog? It's better than being rich but having nowhere to spend it. What do you think of this business? Don't look so unwilling and incredulous. I'm just saying what's on your mind. With our relationship and friendship, there's no need to be pretentious. How about it? It's a deal. One secret manual costs 1,200 strings of coins. Jiang and I wanted nothing more than to use Hidden Dragon as a sword to stab this treacherous fellow to death. She smiled coldly and said, "Is it 1,000 strings of coins or 1,200 strings of coins?" Su Fengnian, whose little trick had been exposed, laughed and said, "Friendship price, 800 strings of coins for 1 book." Jiang and I agreed immediately, "Okay." Su Fengnian waved his hand and picked up the secret letter from Longhu Mountain again. He furrowed his brows and did not raise his head. He said to Jiang and I, who was putting the 2 secret manuals back on the bookshelf, "Do you want me to prepare a chaise lounge for you?" Jiang and I sneered and said disdainfully, "I still want to live." Su Fengnian did not comment on this statement. As soon as Jiang and I left, Sweet Potato carried a sparkling and translucent colored glass cup full of fruit into the room. Colored glass was a treasure that could only be encountered but not sought. Ordinary wealthy families could only have substandard colored glass medicine jade, which was the limit of their wealth. Here, however, it was only used as a small object to hold fruit. Only imperial officials of the 4th rank and above could wear small pieces of colored glass. Moreover, the color and luster were often not clear enough. His Royal Highness was truly wasting natural resources. Su Fengnian picked up a snow pear and took a bite. He said fiercely, "The bull rider just delivered a manuscript of the yin and yang kinship deed." Grandpa Wei, who was in the Tide listening pavilion, only took a few glances at it before he cried tears of joy. He said it was even more wonderful than the ancient I Ching and Yang kinship deed in the pavilion, which is known as the King of 10,000 Pills. Look, the sect leader gave up the cultivation of the Great Yellow Court. I've already left the mountain, but Wudong is still willing to add flowers to brocade. Look at this Mount Longhu. It's only been a little more than a year, and there are already people from the Taoist master's mansion bullying Huang Maner. This group of yellow-purple Taoist priests is really looking for trouble. Sweet Potato said softly, "Longhu Mountain has been powerful for 200 years, but Wudong Mountain has been declining for 300 years. Moreover, Wudong Mountain is in Bailiang, but Longhu Mountain is thousands of miles away. Naturally, their style is different." Su Fengnian said calmly, "I originally planned to go to Longhu Mountain, but now I want to go to the Taoist master's residence to see the style of Yui minister." Sweet Potato gently kneaded Su Fengnian's shoulders. After His Royal Highness started practicing the knife, his originally weak body became much stronger. His physique and spirit improved by leaps and bounds. If Sweet Potato's kneading skills were like embroidery in the past, now even Su Fengnian felt like scratching an itch if she did not beat a bell or beat a drum. Sweet Potato said softly, "Your Highness, do you really want to go to the cold ground again?" Su Fengnian nodded and said with a half-fake smile, "But this time I'm not going to be a stray dog. As His Royal Highness, I have to bring out all the pomp and circumstance. Longhu Mountain, Shangyin Academy, Xinyuan family's Dima Villa, Yuang's Sword Pond, Luotian Garden by the Luoshui River. These are all places I didn't dare to go before. Sweet Potato, shall we go together?" Sweet Potato shook her head and said pitifully, "Can we not go, Your Highness?" Chapter 86. Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile and asked Sweet Potato to put away the letter. He took 2 pots of wine and walked out of the courtyard to the tide listening pavilion. Every time Su Fengnian saw the plaque with the words, "Grand and Magnificent," written on it, he felt uncomfortable. If it was just the 9-dragon plaque alone, it would be fine, but there were 2 other plaques with the words, "Flying Dragon," written on it. Everything in the world was afraid of comparison, which made the 9-dragon plaque seem even more inferior. When Su Fengnian was 14 years old, the old emperor, who had died unexpectedly, could be said to be a man of great talent and bold vision, but his handwriting was really not flattering. Su Fengnian thought of his second sister, Su Weisheng, who also wrote like an earthworm rolling in mud. He could not help but lament that if his second sister was a man, the 300,000 cavalrymen of Bailiang would be firmly in the hands of the Su family. No matter if Su Fengnian was really stupid or not, he would not be able to escape. Su Fengnian pushed the door open and walked into the tide-listening pavilion hall. He said helplessly, "Second sister, your anger should have subsided by now, right? If not, I'll go to Shangyin Academy and let you scold me." Other than drinking with White Fox's face, he also went through the ancestral records of the Daoist master's residence on Longhu Mountain. Among the 4 Daoist masters of this generation, Huang Manor's chief master, Zhao Shituan, was the second in seniority, but he had the least real power. On the surface, it was Zhao Danxia, the national preceptor, who was the leader of the world's Daoist sections. However, it was said that Zhao Danping, the national preceptor, was not easy to deal with. This Daoist master spent most of the year preaching in the capital, and his various immortal deeds were known to the children. His reputation was not inferior to Zhao Danxia's. The last one, Zhao Shi, was the most senior, but it seemed that no news of him was leaked. Every family had its own difficulties, let alone the residence of a Taoist master with countless Taoist scriptures. Su Fengnian wanted to go upstairs today to find out more about the residence that said, "No one can be a Taoist master unless they are related to my clan." The outside world only knew that the Tide Listening Pavilion was an armory, but very few people knew that the pavilion's collection of insider information was even more flourishing. Su Fengnian arrived at the 2nd floor. As soon as he turned the corner, he saw a fresh face. It was an old man with a broken arm. He was short, had a goatee, and was wearing an old and tattered sheepskin coat. He stood on his tiptoes and struggled to pull out a martial arts secret manual. He dipped his saliva and opened it to read. Su Fengnian could not feel any flow of qi, so he decided to make a joke. He tiptoed over and whispered, "Old brother, are you here to steal books as well?" The old man ignored him. He read 10 lines at a glance and flipped through the book extremely quickly. The only sound that could be heard in the quiet loft was the sound of him flipping through the pages. Su Fengnian stretched out his head to glance at the book, wanting to see the contents clearly. The old man was cautious and stingy, so he moved the secret book away from him. Su Fengnian put on an act and stuffed a few books into his bosom. He kindly reminded the old man, "Old brother, don't look. Take as many books as you can." The old man tightened his sheepskin coat and ignored his royal highness as if he were deaf. Su Fengnian whispered, "Didn't you see the face of a white fox? Isn't that the man with the saber who is more beautiful than a beauty? His temper is extremely bad. Let's take it easy. Be careful or you'll have to bear the consequences." The old man finally raised his head and glanced at his royal highness with his cross-eyed eyes. Su Fengnian pretended to be friendly and put his arm around the old man's shoulder. he said with incomparable enthusiasm, "Old brother, the secret manual upstairs is even rarer. I've bribed His Royal Highness maid in the prince's mansion, so I'm relatively familiar with the place. Can I take you there?" The old man's cross-eyed eyes were even more serious, but he did not avoid Su Fengnian's rude action. He seemed to be rather disdainful of the good intentions of this peer beside him. Su Fengnian was just about to speak when he suddenly felt suffocated. He turned around and saw that not only was the white fox present, even Su Xiao and his master Li Yishan were present. Behind Su Xiao were 6 pavilion guards who looked as if they were facing a great enemy. "This is?" The white fox slowly walked over and stared at Su Fengnian as if he was looking at an idiot. The great pillar state Su Xiao did not approach. He only bowed slightly and said softly, "Fengnian, I'll have to trouble you during this trip to Bailiang. When and where did the dynasty's only king with a different surname, the king of Bailiang, treat someone so respectfully? Even Grand Secretary Zhang Julu, who was at the peak of his power, didn't have such qualifications, right?" Su Fengnian, whose hand was still on the old man's shoulder, stiffened. The white fox was enjoying the show, his peach blossom eyes filled with schadenfreude. Su Fengnian secretly glared at the white fox and slowly withdrew his hand, returning the books to their original places. Su Fengnian glanced at Li Yishan, who had made an exception to come downstairs. The latter shook his head with a smile, his eyes indicating that he had no comment. The great pillar state and Li Yishan left together. Su Fengnian clearly sensed that the 6 experts who were guarding the Tide Hark Pavilion for different reasons had relaxed their breathing and were no longer tense. The white fox imitated Su Fengnian by putting his arm around Su Fengnian's shoulder and said with a smile, "His temper is unusually bad. Take it easy, or you'll have to bear the consequences." Su Fengnian wanted to turn around and hug the white fox's shoulder, but the latter dodged and explained awkwardly, "I misheard. His temper is extremely good, extremely good." The white fox left in a carefree manner and climbed up a ladder, continuing to read the books on the 2nd floor. In the end, only His Royal Highness and the cross-eyed old man were left. One was confused and the other was pretending to be mysterious. Su Fengnian thought for a while and felt that he had finally figured it out. He slightly distanced himself from the old man of unknown origin and said cautiously, "Old brother, are you the expert Su Xiao invited to fight the old monster suppressed under the Tide Hark Pavilion?" The old man narrowed his eyes into slits and remained silent. Su Fengnian pretended to be mysterious and said worriedly, "Old brother, this is dangerous. What benefits did Su Xiao promise you? If it's small, don't agree. The great demon suppressed under the pavilion is quite formidable. He has 3 heads and 6 arms, can swallow clouds and spit out fog, and can move mountains and overturn seas." The old man was about to stuff the secret manual into the bookshelf, but he paused and let go. Strangely, the book was suspended in the air and did not fall. The cross-eyed old man turned around and left, annoyed by Su Fengnian's annoying chatter. Su Fengnian's face turned pale. He muttered to himself, "Please don't tell me you're that old monster from the netherworld." The old man's hoarse voice reverberated in the attic. "How did Su Xiao, the butcher, have a son like you? Interesting." Chapter 87. Chapter 2. Su Fengnian plucked up his courage and reached for the secret manual. Nothing out of the ordinary happened as he had expected. He heaved a sigh of relief and gently placed it on the bookshelf. Only then did he run to White Fox's side. Seeing that the old man was not nearby, he anxiously lowered his voice and said, "Why did you release that guy? Why didn't you inform me? What if something happens to him? Aren't you afraid that Xiudong will belong to me?" White Fox's face stood on the ladder and looked down at Su Fengnian. He calmly said, "I didn't release him. I just followed de Zhugua to the netherworld in your eyes and invited him out. As for the deal between de Zhugua and him, I don't know. I only know that there were 3 rules. However, the old man gave me a few pointers and I benefited a lot." Su Fengnian asked, "Then should I go and ask for pointers?" White Fox's face playfully smiled and said, "You can try." Su Fengnian weighed his fledgling bladesmanship and decided to give up. He was afraid that the old man would turn him into ashes with a snap of his fingers. However, the old man did not seem like a temperamental monster. He seemed to be easy to get along with. Would he rely on the old man to support him after he left Bailiang? Was the 3 rules Su Xiao made with him reliable? It was hard to guess the master's temperament. His Royal Highness had better not be eaten alive by the old man who had been suppressed in the pavilion for 20 years before his enemies in Jianghu killed him. He thought about the white-haired old man who was no longer bound by the iron balls and wanted to find trouble with old Huang as soon as he got out of the lake. Would the cross-eyed old man not come looking for him? The more Su Fengnian thought about it, the more scared he became. He was not afraid of any Jianghu master who was nailed to the Ministry of Revenue. Even Wudong's leader Wang Zhongluo and Dragon Tiger Mountain's national advisor Zhao had to be registered in their respective provinces and counties. This was a tough measure that Su Xiao brought to the imperial court after he stepped into the martial arts world. The question now was, who was this old man who crawled from the netherworld to the mortal realm? He was all alone and had nothing to worry about. If he accidentally injured or killed His Highness the Crown Prince and then ran away, who would Su Xiao's 300,000 iron cavalry go to? There were 3 rules. Why would such a top-notch expert talk about the law with you? Su Fengnian silently squatted under the bookshelf, carefully calculating and calculating. This was the benefit of living a poor life with old Huang in the past. Haggling over every penny. Was a penny not money? Regardless of whether it was big or small, he had to be calculative now. Back then, for a few copper coins, His Royal Highness had borrowed a tattered Daoist robe to have his fortune told. In the end, he didn't get many copper coins and was molested by a fat woman for an entire afternoon. The most unlucky thing was that before he received the copper coins, Su Fengnian still had to put on a smiling face and waste his breath to praise the woman who weighed about 200 kilograms for her slender waist and beautiful face. The past was unbearable to look back on. Damn it. Just as Su Fengnian couldn't bear to look back, White Fox's face had quietly walked down the ladder and knocked on Su Fengnian's shoulder with the embroidered winter knife. Su Fengnian raised his head blankly. From his angle, White Fox's face was indeed as flat as a flat plane. It was even flatter than Princess Taiping when Xiao He revealed her sharp horns. Alas, this beauty was actually not a woman. It really made people sigh. Su Fengnian came back to his senses in horror and saw that White Fox's face had narrowed her red phoenix eyes, overflowing with murderous intent. Su Fengnian stood up and saw that the embroidered winter knife was still on his shoulder. He deliberately looked confused and asked, "What's wrong?" White Fox's face said calmly, "You want Bailiang, I'll lend you the embroidered winter knife." Su Fengnian was puzzled, "But I already have the spring thunder." White Fox's face sneered, "You've been using your right hand to practice the knife, but you think I don't know that you're left-handed. Left-handed knife is stronger than right-handed knife. Look at your insidious style. Why don't you leave a way out? Don't pretend. Just lend me the embroidered winter knife. Other than me, who doesn't think that you're just using it for decoration?" Su Fengnian, whose deeply hidden secret was exposed, wasn't angry. He just smiled and picked up a pair of wine pots and said happily, "You're indeed my confidant. Come, let's drink." White Fox's face let go of the embroidered winter knife and shook her head, "I'm not drinking." Su Fengnian caught the embroidered winter knife, which was more exquisite than the spring thunder, and said regretfully, "You're not drinking? Then wouldn't your boring life be even less interesting?" White Fox's face changed the topic and asked, "How many secret manuals do you need to bring with you?" Su Fengnian knew that White Fox's face had no room for negotiation once she decided on something, so he smiled and said, "I need at least 30 to 40 books in a box. I'll throw away one book after I finish reading it." White Fox's face said helplessly, "Are you fishing again?" Su Fengnian held the wine pot in one hand and the embroidered winter knife in the other, and said softly, "Confidant, confidant. Then I'll have to trouble you to pick the books." White Fox's face nodded, as if she was asking him to leave. Su Fengnian went to the top floor and did not see his master. When he went downstairs, he saw Su Xiao sitting on a chair on the 5th floor. In front of him were 3 strangers with different sizes, ages, and chi. Su Xiao threw the 3 secret manuals in front of them and said calmly, "Southern Tang Lu Qiantang, you snuck into the prince's mansion to steal this crouching dragon mound sword manipulation technique. You were defeated by Jian Jiehuang. I saw that you blocked 4 strikes, so I spared your life. Today, this secret manual is in front of you. It's your reward. West Chu Shu Xiu, what you want is White Emperor's pure embracing secrets. East Yu Yang Qingfeng, open your eyes and let this king have a good look. This is your family's ancestral spirit nourishing scripture. None of the 3 dared to pick up the item that they had been dreaming of for years. They lowered their heads, almost touching the ground, and crawled even more humbly. Chapter 88. Su Shao narrowed his eyes and said, "This time, I'll arrange for the 3 of you to follow His Royal Highness. When you return to the palace, this king will give you official hats and secret manuals if you want." Oh, this king remembers now. Shu Xiu, if you like women, I'll give you 10. However, if something happens to His Royal Highness and this king finds out, I advise you to kill yourselves as soon as possible. Otherwise, this king has plenty of ways to make the 3 of you live a life worse than death. Lu Qiantang, Shu Xiu, Yang Qingfeng, the 3 of you are all slaves of a fallen country. However, when the country is gone, you still have some relatives who will accompany you. Do you understand? The 3 trembling people responded in unison. Su Fengnian, who was watching from the side, asked, "Su Shao, just these 3 retainers? Isn't that a bit too few?" Su Shao quickly stood up and gave his seat to His Royal Highness with a chuckle. He flattered, "Fengnian, you have to believe in your father. When raising an army, quality is more important than quantity. When using people accurately, it's not about quantity. This Lu Qiantang uses the tyrannical sword. He has the strength of a 2nd rank and is the least afraid of death. Even if he faces a 1st rank expert, he can withstand 100 moves. When he dies, you'll be able to leisurely withdraw from danger." This West Chu woman called Shu Xiu is proficient in the art of seduction and disguise. She also knows a lot of crooked ways. Her internal strength is also quite good. When she learns the White Emperor's simplicity technique, she'll be like a tiger that has grown wings. In addition, her ability to train young girls is unique. As long as a beauty falls into her hands, it won't be long before she'll be even better than a brothel's courtesan. As for Yang Qingfeng, who was blind in one eye and deaf in one ear, his methods were the strangest and most despicable. He could ask the gods to control corpses and raise ghosts. If you didn't like someone, you could have the surnamed Yang turn them into walking corpses and do whatever you wanted. Fengnian, if they don't do well, the 3 of them can serve each other. I'm sure it won't be boring. Su Fengnian really didn't know what the 3 people on the ground were thinking. In the chilly spring weather, Su Fengnian could clearly see that their clothes were all wet. De Zhugua, who had given his seat to his son, faced the 3 people below him. His tone and expression were much stiffer. He said in a low voice, "Get out. Remember to keep your mouth shut." At this time, Su Fengnian could clearly see the 3 people's appearances. The sword-wielding Lu Qiantang had a tall and sturdy body. Yang Qingfeng was a middle-aged man with a wooden expression. His 10 fingers were sickly white. The West Chu Shu Xiu was actually a young woman with a natural charm. However, her expression was restrained. She didn't dare to act rashly. She didn't even have the courage to look at His Royal Highness. Each of them tightly gripped a secret manual that they yearned for day and night. They carefully bowed and left the hall. Perhaps in the eyes of these 3 people, De Zhugua's upbringing was terrible. The father actually had to give his seat to his son. In the past, they had only heard that His Royal Highness was arrogant and even dared to teach De Zhugua a lesson. Today, they had seen the tip of the iceberg. Su Fengnian threw a wine jug to Su Shao. The latter drank a mouthful and laughed heartily. "Oh right, Wei Shuyang will also follow you out. He's probably moved by the yin-yang kinship deed. What to do, you decide." Su Fengnian said angrily, "You even dare to threaten Grandfather Wei?" Su Shao laughed and said, "How is this a threat? It's not like I don't know that you've always respected your Grandfather Wei." Su Fengnian frowned and said, "Grandfather Wei is already so old. How could Su Shao not know his son's thoughts?" He laughed softly and said, "Don't think that just because Wei Shuyang was chopped into the lake by Chu Kuangren that day, he's no longer an expert. Wei Shuyang is not proficient in martial arts, but he's very proficient in geomancy, divination, and divination. Fengnian, with him by your side, it'll be good for your cultivation in the Great Yellow Court. The art of war emphasizes the combination of the strange and the righteous. The three people you saw just now are all from the unorthodox school. They're all experts in harming people. Even if you have the heart to harm others, you still have to be vigilant. Wei Shuyang is the righteous one. With these 4 people by your side, I'll arrange 100 cavalry for you and find a fierce general to lead. Only then will I be at ease. Su Fengnian made a sound of agreement. Su Xiao seemed to know what his son wanted to ask. He shook his head and said, "That old man was indeed released by me at a great risk. There are 3 rough rules. I can only guarantee that he won't harm you. Whether you can subdue him will depend on your ability. As for who this one-armed old man is, I won't say. You'll find out sooner or later. I'll only say one more thing. Don't take the initiative to give him any sword-like weapons. If you don't give it to him, he won't take the initiative to touch it. Even if this person doesn't have any external objects, it won't be difficult to protect your life no matter what the situation is." Su Fengnian asked, "There's a death warrior trained by you in Wutong Garden?" Su Xiao nodded. Su Fengnian drank a mouthful of wine and said slowly, "I know Blue Bird. Previously, I thought it was impossible for Sweet Potato to be her. However, these days, when I asked her to massage my shoulders, unfortunately, I found out. Although she concealed her breathing, she doesn't understand the mysteries of the Great Yellow Court. Su Xiao, other than the 2 of them, who else do you think it is?" Su Xiao laughed and said, "Even Sweet Potato was discovered by you. That's not easy. Wutong Garden only has the 2 of them as maids. Since that's the case, Father will tell you the truth. Originally, you had 4 death warriors with the codename Heavenly Stem by your side. It was indeed not easy to train them. Unfortunately, during your 3 years of traveling, 2 of them died. Blue Bird is C. B. Anid, have already died in battle." Su Fengnian said with mixed feelings, "Then Sweet Potato is a?" Su Xiao shook his head and said, "You guessed wrong. She is one of the 2 people your mother left behind for you. She is not under my care. As for the other person, you will probably never know in this lifetime." Su Fengnian asked curiously, "Who is this?" Su Xiao still shook his head. "When it's time to appear, it will naturally appear in front of you." Su Fengnian said self-deprecatingly, "When it appears, it will probably be the time when resolutely meets its death, right?" Su Xiao did not refute. Su Fengnian lowered his head and looked at the embroidered winter-spring thunder that had gathered again. He said softly, "When you go to the capital, you should also be careful." Su Xiao smiled faintly and said, "It should be those people who should be careful." Chapter 89. End of Third Watch. The people of the city finally saw His Royal Highness, whom they had not seen in a long time. This time, without the young master of the Yan family, there was only Li Hanlin, the son of the governor of Fengzhou, among his friends. His Highness was accompanied by Yu Yuwei, who had retired from the brothel. Wu Meinyang was holding her white cat. Li Hanlin was called over by Su Fengnian. After returning to Bailiang for more than a year, he had spent most of his time on the embroidered winter saber and Mount Wudong. This time, he had to travel thousands of li with many unspeakable secrets. If he did not meet up with Li Hanlin, he would be letting down young Master Li, who had been a scapegoat for more than 10 years. As soon as Li Hanlin heard that His Royal Highness was going to travel, he impatiently begged brother Su Fengnian to take him along. His coaxing and pestering did not get a nod, so he was a bit angry. During the spring stroll, he waved his horsewhip loudly. Seeing that Li Hanlin still had a listless expression, he joked, "I heard that 2 days ago, you found a pair of young twin husbands in Xianxia County. They have red lips and white teeth. They are extraordinarily handsome. What's wrong? Did you get tired last night?" Yu Yuwei deliberately walked further away. She lowered her head and played with the adorable Wu Meinyang in her arms. She had already accepted Su Fengnian's fate, but she really could not stand Li Hanlin, who was a mischievous son of a rich family. Li Hanlin was angry, but he never resented Su Fengnian. He lowered his voice and said pitifully, "Brother Feng, I'm sick from staying at home. Why won't you take me out to roam the Jianghu? Last time I let it go. This time, you won't take me. How can you treat me like a brother? That yen eating chicken with his father and sister is not honest. Serves his sister right for being chosen by that mentally ill sixth prince. Brother Feng, you've always been a kind person. I beg you, Brother Feng, I'll bring you tea and water every day. Is that not enough? I heard that you're going to travel. This time, I stole all of my father's secret stash. If I go back, he might break one of my legs. Su Fengyan laughed. Your father can bear to beat you? Who would believe that? When he was angry with you, he did not whip a beautiful concubine. Because of you, how many people died? Li Hanlin's face was bitter and he didn't say anything. He was so depressed that he wanted to drown himself in the lake. Su Fengyan patted his shoulder and comforted him. To be honest, it was more suitable to take you last time. This time, it's really not suitable. I'll tell you what Su Xiao has arranged for me this time. There are 4 masters in the open, plus 100 elite cavalry led by a general. Not to mention the men of sacrifice who are good at assassination and counter-assassination, there's also a super master to watch over me. Do you think they're all here to accompany me for a spring walk? Last time we sneaked out. This time, we're doing it openly. Have you forgotten how Kong Wuqi was seriously injured? You're the only child in your family. Don't get mixed up in this muddy water. If you really have nothing to do, I'll let Su Xiao get you a position in the Bailiang army. Play for 2 or 3 years. You don't have to charge and break through enemy lines. Just think of it as going to the border to enjoy the scenery. When you return to Feng province, you can lead the army alone. This way your father will be relieved. Li Hanlin did not utter a word. Su Fengyan loosened the reins and patted the neck of the divine horse that was as white as frost. This horse was the king of wild horses that the Zhu state captured at the border last year. It was tamed for more than half a year before he was willing to put the reins and saddle on it. This time, he brought it back to his favorite son. Su Fengyan sat down by the lake. When Li Hanlin sat beside him, he picked up a stone and threw it into the snail lake. He said softly, Hanlin, don't always grow up. Your father had a son in his later years. He'll be old soon. If you don't mature, do you want your sister to carry the burden of the family? Li Hanlin sighed and said, Brother Feng, you've changed. My sister hated you the most before. If it's the current Brother Feng, she might like you. But I don't like you. Who am I going to find to play with in the future? Su Fengyan threw the stone into the lake again and again. He smiled and said, Your sister is much prettier than Yan Dongwu, but she's also much more stupid. I know that her heart already belongs to someone. I was just teasing her in the past. Sooner or later, she'll realize that the one she likes is actually an idiot. The one she hates is actually a bit more hardworking. As for who you'll find to play with in the future, it's very simple. Quickly find a virtuous wife and play with her. As you play with her, you'll have children. Li Hanlin scratched his head and said, I can have children, but only sons. Wouldn't having daughters be troublesome? When they grow up, they won't be able to escape being harmed by men. It's better to have sons. I'm not afraid of retribution. Su Fengyan smiled and said, You're also afraid of retribution? Li Hanlin lay on the grass and said in a surprisingly serious manner, How can I not be afraid? They all say that there's a God above my head. God knows when I'll die. I'll definitely be in a frying pan. Otherwise, I'll be punished to be a woman in my next life. Su Fengyan laughed and said, What's in your head, kid? Li Hanlin curled his lips and said, Fine, I'll listen to Brother Feng. If I go to the Bailiang army, I might be able to capture a Beimeng princess and raise her as a slave. Su Fengyan clicked his tongue and said, What a great ambition. Li Hanlin got up and asked in a low voice, Brother Feng, tell me, what does that superclass master look like? Su Fengyan turned his head and pointed at the one-armed old man who was dozing off next to the carriage. His skinny body was wrapped in a shabby sheepskin coat. When he dozed off, he would use his fingers to pick at his nose and then secretly bend his fingers to flick it away. Su Fengyan said in a bad mood, He's probably like that. Li Hanlin looked at the old man who was not even fit to be a coachman but had the courage to ride in the same carriage as Yu Huakui. He rolled his eyes and said, Brother Feng, you're lying to a child. Su Fengyan looked at the lake and said with a smile, You're a child. Li Hanlin protested, I'm still a child? Which girl doesn't praise the bird in my pants as a big bird after they're done? Su Fengyan laughed and scolded softly, Are you stupid? Only a child would brag about that. Besides, do you believe the compliments of the brothel girls who don't spend money and only make money? If you're not a child, then what are you? Li Hanlin's anger grew and he said angrily, Motherf asterisk cur, when we get back, I'll throw those whores into the beast cages and dismember them. Su Fengyan really scolded him this time. Don't be a sinner. Hurry up and go to the Bailiang army. Your brain is comparable to your sister's. Li Hanlin obediently said, Oh. In the end, young Master Li, who wanted to follow Su Fengyan out of Bailiang, chose to go to the Bailiang army, which had the strictest military discipline. When they parted at the city gate, Li Hanlin was crying his eyes out. Those who didn't know would think that His Royal Highness had taken young Master Li's dry path. When Su Fengyan returned to the prince's mansion, the old man whose surname she didn't know slowly got off the carriage. He was all skin and bones and he only said two things. The first was, This little girl is not bad. She weighs a lot in the places where she should roll around. She's easy to give birth to babies. Without waiting for Yue to blush, the cross-eyed old man's second sentence caused her face to turn pale. This cat is even better. Stew it and eat it. It'll nourish the body and nourish the spirit. Su Fengyan took a deep breath and then another. The old man swaggered off and glanced at the tide-listening pavilion from afar on the embankment beside the lake. Su Fengyan went to Jiang Ni's courtyard and found her gesturing with a tree branch. He didn't look at her and hurriedly got up to wipe away the traces with the tip of her foot. He asked, I'm leaving Bailiang and might die on the way. You'll have a chance to stab me in the back then. Will you come with me? Of course, I'll bring a chest of secret manuals. If you come with me, they'll all be yours by the end of the year. Jiang and I only hesitated for a moment before nodding. I won't go. Su Fengyan was stunned. He turned around regretfully. Jiang Ni's pretty face flushed red. Her aura dropped to the bottom and her voice was as soft as a mosquito's. Su Fengyan had finally understood. He must be used to rejecting His Royal Highness. He blurted out that he would go, but he didn't have the courage to explain. Admitting her mistake to His Royal Highness, who was her sworn enemy, was worse than killing her. Su Fengyan wasn't kind enough to smooth things over. He just let the little mud man be conflicted for the time being. Arriving at Princess Consort's tomb, Su Fengyan plucked a leaf and sat cross-legged in front of the tombstone. He blew a whistle, melodious and light. It was the tune of the folk song, Spring Goddess. Su Fengyan's state of mind was the most peaceful here. His thoughts were the purest. The old demon under the pavilion. A genuine superclass expert. Don't even think about taking him as a servant. Where was he hiding? Far away on the horizon? Close at hand? Sweet Potato was a death warrior. He didn't know whether to be happy or helpless. Bluebird was the C in the heavenly stem. The bastard answer he had expected. He went to Mount Wudong and Huang Manor went to Mount Longhu. It was the most silent battle of orthodoxies in the world. Was Su Xiao going to overturn it with one hand? Second sister Su Weisheng was learning the tactics of a tyrant in Shangyin Academy. Was she going to suppress the insufferably arrogant Qin Jibao? Or was she going to the scholar's holy land to secretly rope in some hidden power? Why didn't Su Xiao kill Yan Jieshi's whole family when he could? Was it really because Yan Jieshi was his best friend? Su Fengyan threw away the leaf and folded the embroidered winter and spring thunder knives on his knees. He looked at the tombstone and said softly, Mother, Su Xiao didn't avenge you, but Fengyan still remembers. That year, flowers bloomed in spring. His Royal Highness Su Fengyan rode a white horse out of Liangzhou. Chapter 90. Su Xiao usually lived with the common soldiers on the Bailiang border all year round. It seemed that he had to personally see that the Beimang barbarian soldiers were no less numerous than the Bailiang cavalry before he could feel at ease. After the Wangfei passed away, his children gradually grew up. First, Princess Changji, who married far away in Jiangnan. Then his second daughter, Su Weisheng, traveled thousands of miles to study at the Yinjia Academy. 4 years ago, His Royal Highness left to travel. In any case, there was still Huang Manor in the manor. Now, he had completely left. However, old Su couldn't care less about the affairs of these emperors, generals, ministers, and nobles. All the information he had about Dezhugua all came from hearsay when he went to the winery to buy distiller's grains. If he had only heard about it, then so be it. What else could he do? He had followed Dezhugua into battle for many years. He had only seen him once when he was young as a cavalryman. At that time, the one carrying the beetle was still the #1 vanguard, Wang Jian and Wang Jinling. During the bloody battle of Yik, old Su, who had not yet gone blind, had charged out of the city gate with Dezhugua. He watched as General Wang knelt on the ground and held up the city gate with both hands, allowing the Liaodong soldiers to charge out of the city. At that time, General Su had not yet been bestowed the title of king and had not yet received Dezhugua's title. He had only turned his head to glance at the city gate. All of the Bailiang soldiers firmly believed that Dezhugua was the #1 hero of the present age. He was one of the 4 famous generals of the spring and autumn period. Just based on battle records, Dezhugua could not compare to Yi Baikue, who had been hailed as the only one in 500 years by the Yinjia Academy. Before the Battle of Guanlon City, Yi Baikue was said to have never been defeated in 100 battles in his life. Not to mention Yi Baikue, the martial saint of West Chu, who had only lost 1 battle. Even Wang Sui, the prince consort of Dongyue in the past, was more confident and at ease than Su Shao. How could he be in such a sorry state of fleeing with only a few hundred cavalrymen left? But in the end, other than the great general of the same court, only Su Shao remained standing. Furthermore, of the 9 kingdoms of the spring and autumn period, the iron hooves under Su Zhao's banner had destroyed 6 kingdoms. The Confucian general, who became famous 20 years later than Su Shao, had only 2 insignificant small kingdoms. How could he stand shoulder to the king of Bailiang? This was the power of the pillar state. It was only the middle of the month, so old blind Su wasn't willing to spend copper coins to buy distiller's grains. He could only lick his saliva to satisfy his craving. Blind old Su was old. He liked to sit on a wooden stump when the weather was warm and reminisce about the heroic spirit of the past. He thought about the way to survive that the old soldiers had taught him when he was young. He thought about the first time he went into battle with a crossbow in his hand. He thought about the brothers in the army beside him who had their heads chopped off like wheat being reaped. He thought about the rumbling of the hooves of the enemy's armored cavalry. He even thought about the final decisive battle at the western fortress in the spring and autumn. Wang Fei, dressed in white, had personally beaten the war drums. The drumbeats were like thunder. They would not stop until West Chu was broken. Who in the army was not moved? Old Su tilted his head. His face, which had been tempered by the flames of war, was pressed against the smooth wooden walking stick. Most of the old soldiers were like this. They were used to holding sabers and crossbows. They were lucky enough to leave the army alive, but they always felt that something was missing. After their legs were broken, this walking stick had been of great help. These past few years, he had always heard a group of scholars say strange things. They said that more than half of the old soldiers who had fought with the Pillar State had died, and that no one had a good ending. In the end, only Su Shao had become a king with a different surname. If old Su's legs had been broken, he would have stomped his feet and cursed. What the F***ck did these scholars with water in their brains know? Those who had truly gone into battle knew the saying that sabers and swords had no eyes. Were all the injuries on the Pillar State's body fake? Were they all smeared on his body with sabers, bows, arrows, and spears? If even the Pillar State did not become the king of Bailiang, then wouldn't all those old soldiers who did not hesitate to fight with their last breaths have died in vain? Who would still remember the 600 armored soldiers from Liaodong back then and the 300,000 Bailiang cavalry that no one in the world could compete with? Old Su spat and scolded, "Those damn scholars are the most boring. If old Su was younger, I could have smacked all their teeth out with a single slap." Old Su, who was panting from just taking a few more steps, heard a familiar voice above his head. "Brother Su, are you still in good health?" Old Su hurriedly got up. The person who spoke was the Yamen official who had come to his house to deliver the silver taels. He had also instructed several of his retainers on the spot to repair the thatched hut properly. As expected, the thatched hut no longer had any leaks from then on. The monthly taels of silver were also sent to him on time. Old Su was an old soldier who had fought countless battles. He could vaguely guess that this Yamen official had also gone through many hardships in the army. He had a murderous aura, so he shouldn't think that he was just fooling people. The cowardly old Su did not even eat or kill a lot of pigs. This was true, but he had lived most of his life in the army. Those fierce soldiers who had killed dozens of people would look more ferocious than ordinary people even when they were eating. That person gently pressed down on old Su, who was standing up with the help of his walking stick. He laughed and said, "Brother Su, sit down and talk. Do whatever is comfortable. There's no need to be so polite with me." Chapter 91. Old Su didn't insist. He was old, so he didn't try to be brave like a young man. He turned his head to look at that person and said happily, it's fine. I can eat and sleep. I just have to wait for the end of the month to buy some meat and wine to reward myself. These days, the world is peaceful. I don't have to worry about food and clothing. It's very good." These are words of conscience. Old Su is blind, so I can't say that I'm blind. Isn't that right, Darren? The visitor smiled and said, "Old Su, you're not blind at all. You have a lively mind. You're much better than many officials and generals." Old Su blushed and said, "Darren, these words are too serious. I don't dare to accept them. I, Old Su, am just an old Baoyang soldier who didn't die. In the past, I heard a kid surnamed Su talk about dying on the battlefield, but I don't really understand. In any case, it's better to live than to die. Now, I'm not afraid of death. I've lived to this age without any loss. I'm just worried about one thing. If one day I fall asleep and don't wake up, then so be it. But I don't have a coffin bearer. I'm worried about this." That kid Su chuckled and said that if I really can't do it, I can't say for sure that I won't see him for an entire year. I think it's difficult. The Yamen official said calmly, "That kid Su promised to be a coffin bearer for you?" Old Su instantly became spirited. "Isn't that so? That kid Su is a good person. I, Old Su, have never made a mistake in recognizing people. It's just that this kid is a bit sloppy in many things. He climbs walls and steals ducks. I'm worried that he won't be able to find a good wife in the future. 2 days ago, that kid Su even brought a pot of good wine to my place to chat. However, he said that he was going out again. Unfortunately, I was woken up by the smell of wine at night and accidentally drank the remaining half of the pot. Otherwise, I could have entertained Darren today." "Ha, Darren, don't think that Old Su's broken mouth can't hold back on talking nonsense with you." That person laughed and said, "I won't. Nowadays, it's hard for me to find someone to chat with. Younger brother Su, you want a drink? When I came here, I forgot that I usually don't drink when I'm old. Today, I'll make an exception. If brother Su can wait, I'll get someone to buy it." Old Su hurriedly waved his hand and said, there's no need. Milord is busy with important matters. How can I let Milord waste his time and money here?" That person smiled and leisurely enjoyed the afternoon sun with Old Su. The warmth of the sun spread over their bodies was much more comfortable than any brocade clothing. Old Su leaned sideways and leaned on his walking stick with both hands. With a dazed expression, he said, "My greatest regret in my life is that I didn't get close enough to see the Pillar of Da. An old brother who passed away last year was much luckier. After the Battle of Jingyang, he killed hundreds of thousands of surrendered soldiers, and he was only 100 steps away from the Pillar of Da. That old brother still talks about it with his eyes closed. Look at how smug he is." The blind Old Su had always regarded him as a small government official in the Yamen. He softly said, "Su Shao is nothing more than a hunchbacked old soldier. What's there to see?" In an instant, Old Su's mind went blank. Since he was able to walk out of the battlefield covered in millions of bones alive, how could he be a fool? In Baoyang, who would dare to say that Su Shao was nothing more than a hunchbacked old soldier? Other than the Pillar of Da, who else could it be? Old Su's withered body, which needed a walking stick to walk, began to tremble violently. In the end, the old soldier of Baoyang, who was still alive, had tears streaming down his face. He turned his head and said with trembling lips, "The Pillar of Da?" That person didn't admit or deny it. He only called out to old Su, Brother Su. Old Su seemed to have gone mad as he struggled to get up. Ignoring the pillar of Da's obstruction, he threw away his walking stick and knelt on the ground. He used all the strength in his body, the heroic spirit of 30 years of fighting in 6 countries, and the spirit of 10 years of struggling at death's door to suppress the old soldier's passion and sobbing. He kowtowed and said, Su Yongguan, one of the 18 old battalions of Jinzhou, the last rider of the Fish Drum Battalion, pays his respects to General Su. Today, the 18 old battalions of Jinzhou no longer existed. Just like the 600 iron armors whose fame was gradually fading away, the younger Bailiang cavalry had at most heard of some hot-blooded deeds. The Fish Drum Battalion. It was known as the No. 1 death battle under the Su banner. The last battle was at the Western Rampart. Wang Fei, dressed in white as snow, beat the fish dragon drum that was as tall as a person in the Fish Drum Battalion. She won the battle for the crown of the Liang dynasty in one spurt of energy. Nearly 1,000 people from the Fish Drum Battalion fought to the death without retreating. In the end, only 16 people survived. The rider, Su Yongguan, lost an eye in that battle. The arrow was pulled out along with it. He fought again until he fainted among the pile of corpses. In fact, in the old soldier's heart, whether it was the Pillar of Da or the King of Bailiang, they were only titles for outsiders. In his heart, he was still willing to call him General Su. Old Su, who was supported by Su Xiao, sat back down on the wooden stool. His face was full of tears, but he said with a smile, I've lived enough in this life. General Su, may I be so bold as to ask, is that young Su? Su Xiao said softly, he's my son, Su Fengyan. The old soldier's face was pressed against the walking stick that the Pillar of Da personally took back. He repeatedly muttered, I've lived enough, I've lived enough. The last person in the Fish Drum Battalion, old Su Yongguan, slowly closed his eyes. General Su, Wang Fei, you have a good son. I, old Su, have to go down and drink with my old brothers. Tell them that the sound of the horses' hooves of the 300,000 Bailiang cavalry will only make the enemy more and more terrified. It can't be small, it can't be weak. Under the Su banner, the fish dragon drum sounded. Old Su Yongguan died peacefully. Chapter 92. The book review section is also a chaotic battle of spring and autumn. It's very exciting. His Royal Highness rode out of the city on a white horse with 2 sabers attached. Behind him was a tall and sturdy general leading more than 100 light cavalry. However, the carriage at the front was very ordinary. The coachman was a delicate and pretty woman. Even His Royal Highness was riding on a horse. Presumably, no one had the right to sit in the carriage. After more than 10 li out of the city, the 100 Phoenix Battalion mounted crossbowmen deliberately distanced themselves and followed from a distance. That General Wu Dian rode alone to Su Fengyan's side. Even though he was facing one of the most prominent four fangs of Bailiang in the past 10 years, his loyalty was unquestionable. The 3 of them, Lu Qiantang, Shu Xiu and Yang Qingfeng, were still very cautious and prepared to attack at any time. It could be seen that the 3 of them were terrified of Su de Zhugua to the bone. They were afraid that the slightest movement would harm His Royal Highness and they would have to apologize with their deaths as soon as possible. Su Fengyan was asking the old Taoist priest Wei Shuyang about the essence of the yin and yang kinship deed. Seeing the nervous posture of Lu Qiantang and the other 2, he didn't say anything. He waited until the halberd-wielding general on horseback bowed to ask for instructions. Only then did he smile and say, General Ning, you let your men and horses follow behind me only because I don't want to eat dust. There's no other meaning. Don't be nervous. Keep a distance of half a li. If there's really danger, it's just a matter of sprinting. Don't worry, General Ning, this is my personal guard camp. Every one of them is a valiant elite selected from the various armies of Bailiang. With General Ning in command, there's no chance of anything going wrong. This halberd-wielding Wudian general had a poetic name, Ningamei, but he was big and burly, his entire body fierce-looking. The Phoenix Battalion's cavalry were all light cavalry with sabers and crossbows in their hands, only his armored cavalry was wearing heavy armor. In his hand was an eye-catching iron halberd with the character, in his hand. Furthermore, he carried a big sack on his back, filled with more than a dozen short halberds. At first glance, one could tell that he was a military general who could fight 10,000 men. Before Su Fengnian left the city, he had received a summary of Ning Amei's military exploits. He couldn't help but admire him. Ning Amei was an orphan on the battlefield. He was picked up by General Wang Jian and raised. After Wang Dueling died in battle, he inherited his adoptive father's mantle. As long as he had a halberd in his hand, he had performed the magnificent feat of taking the head of a general in the midst of an army of 10,000 men several times. After each incident, the Great Pillar State would use a great merit to offset his small crime. Otherwise, he wouldn't be the one with the lowest martial rank among Bailiang's four fangs. However, as long as Ning Amei could go into battle, he could kill people. He didn't have to hide behind the formation and do things like wave flags and shout battle cries. He didn't care about these things. Since ancient times, those who dared to use a halberd as a weapon were all fierce men who killed people as if they were grass. On the battlefield, he was a killing god. Off the battlefield, Ning Amei wasn't the kind of barbarian general who would whip his soldiers at every turn. On the contrary, he was very gentle, respectful, and thrifty. Because his voice was full of energy, it was inevitable that it would shake the heavens. However, the tone of his voice always sounded like it came from the cherry lips of a Jiangnan girl. It was really an extremely strange thing. At this time, hearing His Royal Highness's explanation, Ning Amei held the halberd diagonally, the tip of the halberd facing the ground. He smiled shyly and said, "For this trip, the Great Pillar State ordered me to listen to all of His Royal Highness's orders. Your Highness, I will do as you say." Su Fengnian glanced at the iron halberd in Ning Amei's hand and asked curiously, "General Ning, this halberd should weigh 70 to 80 pounds? Ning Amei said in surprise, "His Royal Highness recognizes this halberd as the halberd?" Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily and said, "I occasionally heard my second sister mention it. It's not to the extent that she would recognize it as a fancy ceremonial halberd." Ning Amei didn't notice that the atmosphere around him was a bit stagnant. He said to himself, "His Royal Highness guessed correctly. This halberd weighs 75 pounds. Normal people can't lift it." Su Fengnian, who had two sabers at his waist, laughed loudly and said, "If there's a chance, I want to see General Ning's flying halberd. I heard Su Xiao say that your short halberd can make a person fall off a horse with one strike. There's never been a miss." Ning Amei was a bit embarrassed and only smiled. In the end, he excused himself and rode back, dragging the halberd behind him. Xu Xiu, who had a charming appearance but an unknown heart, pulled on the reins and coldly watched from the sidelines. The corners of her mouth hooked up, full of disdain. This Bailiang's trusted aide really didn't understand the ways of the officialdom. Since His Royal Highness could see through the weapon, it didn't matter if it was just a blind cat bumping into a dead mouse. Didn't he know how to take advantage of the situation and flatter him a bit? He even said in front of His Royal Highness that he couldn't lift the halberd. Was he mocking His Royal Highness for not having the strength to truss up a chicken? You're a brute who doesn't understand. Even if His Royal Highness isn't an expert in the use of sabers, those two peerless sabers are chilling. Just by looking at them, you can tell that they're killing sabers soaked in blood. How can normal people handle them? The tall and sturdy swordsman Lu Qiantang, whose figure didn't lose to Ning Amei, just closed his eyes and focused. His thumb hooked around the hilt of the giant sword Red Cloud he picked out from the armory. Yang Qingfeng was shrouded in a loose black robe, which made her snow-white hands even more dazzling. Su Fengnian continued forward and sighed softly. Back in the day, West Chu claimed to have 1 million people with halberds within 5,000 li. But those hundreds of thousands of invincible great halberd warriors still lost to Su Zhao's cavalry. It seems that in this world, the Bailiang cavalry is still the sharpest spear. The old Taoist priest Wei Shuyang stroked his beard and laughed softly. In my early years, I was fortunate enough to see the marvelous sight of thousands of Bailiang cavalry galloping in a line. It was like the tide of Guangling River, overturning rivers, overturning seas, and destroying mountains. I was fascinated. Su Fengnian blinked and said, "Grandpa Wei, I've seen this many times." The old Taoist priest was stunned for a long time. Finally, he understood and smiled with gratification. This made Xu Xiu, who was in the dark, puzzled. Xu Xiu and the other two had been raising eagles and dogs in the prince's mansion for quite a long time. The longest was Yang Qingfeng, who had been raising eagles and dogs for 7 or 8 years. At that time, His Royal Highness was already the infamous #1 silk pants in Baoyang. Chapter 93. There was no such thing as a demonic sect or cult in Jianghu, and no sect or faction that didn't know the difference between life and death would label themselves as demonic. Even for some vicious sects, once they were associated with the word demonic, most of them would run to crowded places to cry for their parents. This was especially true for Jianghu, which had been crushed by the Baoyang cavalry. No one had the guts to walk this path that was destined to be short-lived. About 60 years ago, Jianghu was a chaotic place, just like the 9 kingdoms of spring and autumn in the Central Plains. However, there was a sect that most of Jianghu looked up to and called itself the demonic sect. What happened to it? Mount Longhu easily produced an immortal that was hard to come by in 100 years, Qi Xuanzhen. He posted a message to the world, inviting a battle to the devil-slaying platform on top of the lotus flower. The great spiritual master Qi single-handedly slaughtered 6 pretentious devil Dao experts. Since then, he was unable to recover from the setback and had faded from the public eye for 50 years. Only God knew how many times he had been ridden on by the previous generation of sections. Xu Xiu came from a leftist sect in West Chu, which had studied some witchcraft that had been severely suppressed by the orthodox path. Although she was a rare witch in the sect and had a chance to inherit the position of sect leader, Xu Xiu had her own ambitions. She looked down on the petty sect of less than 100 people, so she escaped to live a carefree life. Relying on her good looks and low-class seduction techniques, she accidentally obtained an incomplete high-class mental cultivation method from a middle-aged Taoist on Mount Kongtong. After she practiced it, her power skyrocketed. Once she learned that it was only a third of the complete version of the White Emperor's pure embracing secrets, she followed the clues and found her way to the Tide Listening Pavilion's armory. It was fortunate that she didn't die. As soon as she entered the prince's mansion, before she could even see the Tide Listening Pavilion's shadow, she was beaten half to death by the residence's hidden masters. After that, she exchanged several successful assassinations for a chance to live. This time, she obtained the pure embracing secrets and naturally cherished it. Don't think that Baoyang Palace was only a place for assassination. Every time a group came, Baoyang would immediately send out a group to take revenge. Every time, they would eliminate the source of trouble. This was the viciousness of the great pillar of the country, Su Xiao. Xu Xiu, a fearless heterodox person, would only become as timid as a mouse as the accumulation of murder cases. No matter how fearless a heroine was, she wouldn't be able to withstand the hundreds and thousands of methods of the pillar state that made people wish they were dead. Su Fengyan did not have a good impression of Xu Xiu and the other two, so there was no need for him to exchange pleasantries. He simply urged his horse to the side of the carriage, lifted the curtain, and saw Yu Yue playing with Wu Meinyang in her arms. She was in a good mood. Whether it was the courtesan Yu Yue, or the orphaned girl of the West Chu Emperor's sword attendant, Yu Xuanji, no matter where she went, she was a caged sparrow. But if she could move to a bigger cage, from the imperial palace to the entire Jianghu, then her mood would definitely be better. Jiang and I was crouching in a corner. He wasn't sitting down but squatting down to read a secret book. His brows were slightly furrowed. Everything he did seemed to be very serious and diligent. As for the old man wearing the sheepskin coat, he took up more than half of the space in the carriage. He took off his boots and used his hands to rub his smelly feet. After he was done, he put his feet in front of his nose and sniffed. Su Fengyan let down the curtain and said helplessly, "It's been hard on Yu Yue and the little mud man." His Royal Highness muttered to himself, "Should we change to another carriage? Forget it, we're in the same carriage. If something happens, this strange old man will at least make a move. Otherwise, if something happens to me, he might not even bother to make a move, let alone 2 women." Su Fengyan took out a newly drawn map from his bosom. After the Liang dynasty unified the Central Plains, The original 6 prefectures expanded to the current 19 prefectures. It could be seen that during the Spring and Autumn War, the Liang dynasty was like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. It was reasonable that Su Shao became the only pillar of the dynasty. Bailiang was a general name that included the entire Liangzhou and half of Lingzhou. Their group had just left the city not long ago. The city was in the southernmost part of Bailiang, and it was still a day's journey away from the northern border of Yongzhou. The official road that Su Fengnian took was the same one that he had taken 4 years ago. This journey was also easy at first. It could be said that they were wearing fine clothes and riding fine horses. It was only after they entered the hinterland of Yongzhou that the journey began to be miserable. Perhaps because she couldn't stand the cross-eyed old man in the carriage, Yu Wei held the white cat and poked her head out. She looked at Su Fengnian with a pleading look in her eyes. Su Fengnian snapped his fingers. Yang Qingfeng suddenly opened his eyes. With a whistle, a maroon steed that didn't have a rider trotted toward His Royal Highness. It was said that Yang Qingfeng could even raise Wild Ghost Mountain Chief, so riding a horse was nothing difficult for him. Yu Wei, whose horsemanship was quite good, sat on the back of the horse and carefully comforted Wu Meinyang. For a moment, the entire road behind them was filled with dust. The sound of horse hooves and the earth trembled. It was clearly not a formation that 100 light cavalry could create. Su Fengnian turned his horse around and squinted his eyes to look in that direction. The carriage also stopped. Jiang and I, who had left the prince's estate for the first time in her life, poked her head out. Su Fengnian smiled. Across from him, Yu Wei had a look of fear on her face. He waved his hand and said, "Change horses? Come sit with me." In all of Bailiang, there were only 2 people who had this kind of spirit and skill. His old man, Su Shao, didn't dare to steal His Royal Highness's limelight. Then the truth of the remaining person was revealed. It was rumored that Bailiang's 100,000 cavalrymen listened to his every word, the villain Tuesday. How could Su Fengnian not recognize him? Yu Wei didn't have the face to do so, but when she saw Su Fengnian narrow his eyes, she could only dismount and mount again, sitting in his lap. Including Great Halberd Ningame, there were 3 of Bailiang's 4 fangs. Su Fengnian clicked his tongue and said, "What a grand display." Amidst the dense crowd of cavalrymen, a white-clothed man spurred his horse forward. Thinking back, this white-clothed man seemed to have galloped out of the formation with such style, killing the world-renowned General Marshal Saint Yi and his wife and daughter in front of the battlefield. The incomparably elegant man bowed slightly on the horse and said softly, "Chen Jibao has come to send His Royal Highness off." In the vision of Bailiang's 3 fangs and the dozen or so valiant generals in the front row, they only saw His Royal Highness holding a beauty in his arms, and the beauty holding a white cat in her arms. On one side was the most outstanding person of the younger generation who came from a valiant family of generals and followed Su Daju since childhood. On the other side was the gentle young master who played with the cat in the countryside. It seemed that in an instant, the difference between the 2 was obvious. Su Fengnian turned his horse around again, a finger twirling the woman's hair. He said slowly, "I won't see you off." Chapter 94. Begging for collection. I'm only 2,000 away from 40,000. Ningame led the 100 Phoenix Battalion Light Cavalry and continued to follow His Royal Highness. He didn't make a sound when he passed by White Chen Jibao. Although Ningame was a top-class warrior, he wasn't interested in climbing up the ranks in the Bailiang army. He gave off a dull feeling. Today, Little Butcher led 300 heavy cavalry to send him off and created such a commotion. Ningame couldn't help but frown when he passed by that eye-catching white robe. He realized that His Royal Highness didn't look at him with the same friendliness as before. Ningame gripped the bow-iron halberd in his hand. Its weight was second only to Wang Tongshan, the #1 general under King Yan's command. He turned his head and saw that the 100 or so Phoenix Battalion personal guards all turned their heads every few steps to admire Chen Jibao. Ningame fell into deep thought. Bailiang's 4 fangs, Dian Xiongzong led the 6,000 iron stupas, the second most elite heavy cavalry, and Wei Fuqing led the 1/3 of Bailiang's white crossbow feather forest. Both of them were trusted generals that Chen Jibao had groomed. Ningame wasn't familiar with these two young generals of Baoyang. They were only limited to their skillful coordination on the battlefield. In terms of prestige in the army, Ningame didn't lose to them at all. However, in terms of military power, the difference was more than 3 ranks. Ningame laughed at himself. He raised the halberd in his hand and slowed down the speed of the cavalry. He pulled away from His Royal Highness's request. Dian Xiongzong turned his head and spat on the ground. He said disdainfully, "General, is His Royal Highness scared out of his wits? He doesn't even dare to let us send him off. It's better if he doesn't. Old Dian isn't willing to be snubbed. We Iron Stupas are all brave men who use Baimang barbarians' heads as urinals. We can't afford to lose face like this." Wei Fuqing, who was more like a private school teaching children how to read and write, was much more reserved. He chuckled and said, "For years ago, when your highness went out to travel, you only brought an old coachman with you. His Royal Highness is in high spirits. Naturally, he doesn't like our intrusion. Old Dian, you're an old man who only knows how to kill. How can you understand His Royal Highness's romance?" The 6,000 Iron Stupas could be ranked second in the Baoyang army, second only to the Baimang army's dragon cavalry that was personally led by Su Xiao. One was black and one was white. They made Baimang's 350,000 soldiers tremble in fear. During the Spring and Autumn War, Su Xiao taught the world a bloody truth. Victory and defeat on the battlefield were never simply a competition of numbers of soldiers. It was not even a matter of the ratio of armor, but the combination of different types of soldiers. The Western Wall was the fish drum camp, which was the number 1 in a battle to the death. They were not afraid of death. They opened up a bloody path for the 3,000 great snow dragon cavalry to penetrate the hinterland of Yi by Kuei's halberd army. Chen Zhibao sat in the middle of the army, strategizing. Wang Fei personally beat the drums. Su Xiao abandoned his helmet and bore the brunt of the charge. The 3,000 white horses and white armor galloped like thunder. Among them were the corpses of more than 1,000 soldiers from the fish drum camp. Since the scholars of West Chu said that there was no West Chu after the Western Wall, then Su Xiao made West Chu completely disappear. The spring and autumn period of the 9 kingdoms, where famous generals emerged in large numbers, was the most dazzling era for martial artists. Dian Xiongnan, Wei Fuqing, was precisely a young general who rose to prominence from the flames of war. His fame was accumulated by stepping on the white bones of the spring and autumn period generals one after another. There was an indescribable pride and ambition in his body. How could he possibly look down on the vultures of the younger generation? So what if you are His Royal Highness? Baoyang's army places great importance on military merit. Every year, there are so many silk pants who are thrown to the border by their father's generation. Which one of them is not drilled by them until they are hovering between life and death, and do not even have the strength to cry? Which one of them did not in the end forget even their 18 generations of ancestors, and only remember their superiors in the army? You, Su Fengnian, other than the title of His Royal Highness, what else does he have? Dian Xiongnan spat and laughed nastily. Damn his mother's romance. The year before last, Laozi led 600 iron cavalry straight into Baimang for 800 li, and robbed a provincial governor's daughter. She was stripped naked on horseback, and after that, she was stabbed to death and hung on a spear. That is Laozi's romance. Wei Fuqing bent down and stroked his beloved horse's mane. He joked. As a result, you were hung on the fence of the barracks by the great pillar state and froze for the whole night. I heard that your thing was frozen to the point that it could not be seen. Can you still use it now? Dian Xiongnan patted his belly and laughed boldly. It can still be thick and thin. Laodian has no objections on horseback and bed. Wei Fuzi, if you don't believe me, you can borrow your daughter and give it a try. I guarantee you won't be convinced. Wei Fuqing felt a headache coming on. He said, You dare to have ideas about my daughter? Do you believe that I, by New Yulin, will destroy your 6,000 iron stupas? Dian Xiongnan curled his lips and said, Fuzi is farting again. If you have the ability, each of us will pull out 100 people and throw them on the drill ground to fight. Let's see which family's bastard will lie on the ground and cry for his mother. From beginning to end, the little butcher Chen Jibao, whose reputation was not as important as that of Bailiang's 4 fangs and 4 tiger generals, did not interrupt. He did not remind his right-hand men to be careful with their words, nor did he echo and make sarcastic remarks about His Royal Highness, who was unpopular. His expression was indifferent. His adoptive father, de Zhuguo, was about to enter the capital to meet the emperor. Therefore, for the time being, he would not go to Bailiang's border where Beimang's 2 armies intersected. All military affairs would be handed over to Chen Jibao. Bailiang's 300,000 iron cavalry had long been accustomed to this. The little butcher was not only the first adoptive son of de Zhuguo, but also a famous general who was outstanding in both civil and military strategy, who did not know that in the past, if he had not personally refused His Majesty the Emperor to let him go to the south to lead an army alone, he would have long been a major official of the southern border. How could the 10 southern tribes of barbarians have the chance to jump around on the border? Wei Fuqing smiled and said, Ning Deji has received this bitter task. I reckon he will be so angry that he won't be able to sleep every day. Dian Xiongnan gloated, Ning Tiji is not a bad person. When he kills people, he is not lenient. He is strong enough in both horse and foot battles. Lao Dian is as famous as him. I am convinced. As for you, Wei Fuzi, to be honest, you are somewhat inferior. Wei Fuzi did not take it seriously. Dian Xiongnan had always been outspoken. When he talked to him about the principles of war and strategy, he would not listen. Chen Jibao looked at the sky above his head and muttered, The sky has changed. Yu Yue coyly wanted to ride the horse alone. Su Fengnian could not persuade her, so he simply gave the white horse to her and got on the carriage. In the carriage, the cross-eyed old man finally put on his boots. He stretched his neck to look at the secret book in Jiang Ni's hands. Jiang and I, who was squatting in the corner, was the most stingy. He put up the cover and read silently. The 2 people were in a deadlock, competing in patience. When the old man saw His Royal Highness get into the carriage, he appeared to be somewhat impatient. His nose and eyes were vertical, and he did not give him a good face. After Su Fengnian sat down, he took off the embroidered winter and spring thunder double blades and placed them on his knees. The simple and unadorned spring thunder double blade was below and the beautiful embroidered winter thunder double blade was above. The 2 blades, one long and one short, overlapped. It was also a beautiful sight. Even Jiang and I could not help but take a few more glances. She had seen Su Fengnian's double blades roll up 1,000 piles of snow on the ice surface of Tidehark Lake. In her heart, her hatred for Su Fengnian deepened. Only such a beautiful woman was worthy of these double blades. Su Fengnian, no matter how diligent you were in practicing your blades, you were still a 2-headed snake with 3 legs. You would only disgrace the double blades. Su Fengnian, who came to listen to the book, automatically ignored the old man with the sheepskin fur coat. He closed his eyes and ordered, Read the 1,000 Swords Grass Compendium. Chapter 95. Jiang and I opened the box full of secret manuals by his feet and finally found the ancient seal cover of the 1,000 Sword Grass Compendium. He flipped it open and started reading. During this period of time, not only did he earn a lot of money from reading, he was also forced to learn nearly 100 rare words. The price was 10 coins per word. Jiang and I had to emphasize every word the second time he saw it. He was indeed a little mud man who hated evil as if it was his enemy. Su Fengnian listened to the voice that was much more comfortable than when he read it for the first time. His breath slightly changed along with the style of the outline of 1,000 swords. The scholar officials wrote poems based on their feelings. The more emotional they were, the more moved they would be when they read it. The same principle applied to the writing of a warrior. The things they wrote were completely different from the Buddhist scriptures. This outline of 1,000 swords was even more sonorous. No wonder White Fox Face highly praised this book and said it was one of the top 3 books in the rich collection of books on the 2nd floor. Su Fengnian listened attentively. But he was interrupted by someone. It's all bullsh *t. Jiang and I, who was interrupted, stuck his head out from behind the book and stared at him. The old man was quite disrespectful to His Royal Highness and deliberately kept a distance from him. But when he saw Jiang and I, he squeezed out a smile and took the initiative to explain, "This old man is saying that this book is full of nonsense and will lead people astray." Su Fengnian opened his eyes and smiled. "What do you mean?" No matter how good his skills were, his bad temper was definitely rare in the world. The old man rolled his eyes and sneered, "This old man is telling you in detail about the way of the sword. Are you sure it's not playing the lute to a cow?" Su Fengnian was helpless. This old monster seemed to be no younger than Wang Xinji in Su Zhao's words. He could only endure it. Jiang and I obviously liked to see Su Fengnian not being taken seriously. Although he did not feel close to this strange old man, at this moment his good impression of him skyrocketed. The old man saw the change in Jiang Ni's expression and was in a good mood. He spared no effort to attack Su Fengnian. "You're just a layman in the way of the blade. Don't ruin the outline of 1,000 swords. No matter how much nonsense this book is, it's not something you can understand. If this old man is deceived by the title of the book and really thinks that it's talking about various sword moves, then you'll laugh yourself to death. What you don't know is that Du Sikong, who only scratched the surface of the way of the sword at 50 years old, is good at strange sword moves. But this old man has already reprimanded him. That's why he wrote the outline of 1,000 swords, which is derived from sword moves to seek sword essence. But Du Sikong is only half a bucket of water. Swaying back and forth, there are only small splashes outside the bucket. What's funny is that the later generations can't see that these small splashes are the only good part of the book." Su Fengnian was shocked. "Du Sikong, who wrote the outline of 1,000 swords, asked you for advice." The old man stretched out 3 fingers and said matter-of-factly, "After standing in the snow for 3 days and 3 nights, this old man reluctantly gave me 3 words of advice." Su Fengnian was shocked. Jiang and I, on the other hand, was 100 times better than the crown prince. She had a playful look on her face as if she believed him. She said in a neutral tone, "You're really good at bragging. If you have the ability, write a book and put it in the armory." The old man always had a sour face in front of Su Fengnian, but when it came to Jiang and I, he put on a kind face. "Little girl, this old man is used to being alone. He disdains to put all his thoughts into writing. Besides, there are only 5 or 6 books in the Tide Listening Pavilion that can catch this old man's eye. It's not that great of a place." Jiang Ni's eyes widened. "Still boasting? Are you done yet?" The old man was stunned for a moment. Instead of getting angry, he was happy and laughed loudly. Su Fengnian lost interest in the outline of 1,000 herbs because of the old man, so he had Jiang and I change to another secret book. In the end, he read less than 1,000 words and was interrupted by the old man's arrogant comments. He changed to another book and, as expected, it was not worth a single cent. Su Fengnian only felt that he benefited a lot, but Jiang and I was already going crazy. Studying and earning money was hard work, and it was earned by serving this enemy Su Fengnian. The old man was pretending to be an expert and giving advice. At first, Jiang and I endured because of his age, but after a few times, she could not take it anymore. Jiang and I threw the book and said with a face full of anger, "Shut up. Look, one who is close to ink will be stained black." She was getting better and better at learning the catchphrase from His Royal Highness. Su Fengnian did not pay attention to Jiang Ni's outburst. He laughed and asked, "How about I go find Lu Qiantang to practice my blade and give him some pointers?" The old man stretched and comfortably laid down in the carriage. He said in a bad mood, "This old man is willing to say a few words about the original owner of your 2 blades. Forget about you. As for your perception, it's so. It's probably half of this old man's when he was young. It's a pity that you started practicing your blade too late. Your internal energy is not your own. I don't believe that you can practice 3 to 6 times." Jiang Ni's eyes were full of smiles. Jiang and I added insult to injury. "These words are true." Su Fengnian lowered his head and stretched out a finger to stroke the winter-embroidered scabbard. Half of his perception? Jiang and I seemed to have thought of something and coldly said, "That person is the villain Chen Jibao? He looks much more like His Highness the Crown Prince than you." Su Fengnian raised his head and laughed. "That's just a resemblance." Jiang and I was actually a bit angry that her number one enemy was so useless and humiliated her and the divine talisman. She fiercely said, "Don't you know how to suppress that Chen Jibao's limelight? Turning around and running, aren't you afraid of being laughed at?" Su Fengnian said dumbfoundedly, "Or should I fight with Chen Jibao?" Jiang and I hatefully said, "Whether or not I can beat him is one thing, whether or not I can fight him is another." The old man tugged at his sheepskin coat and said with a smile, "Little girl, you don't know anything about this. The crown prince in front of us is mediocre in knife skills, but his mind has been taught by Su Xiao. It's just that the villain surnamed Chen probably already knew this, so he's not that easy to fool. On the other hand, those boorish men behind us who only have strength but not brains probably didn't see it." Su Fengnian turned a deaf ear. Jiang and I was deep in thought. The old man's words hit the nail on the head. "Little girl, in terms of scheming, you probably won't be able to beat this treacherous guy. Why don't this old man teach you some martial arts? You still have a chance to compete. Even if he has the entire Great Yellow Courtyard, as long as he hasn't truly touched the threshold of martial arts, you can still defeat him with one sword. Who said that a woman can't have the strength of 1,000,000 masters with one sword? This kid's mother is one of the only 3 sword masters that this old man has seen in his life." Su Fengnian didn't say anything. His left hand held the spring thunder. The old man looked at the twin blades and laughed. "So he's used to using his left hand. Little girl, you see, this old man said that this kid is very cunning." Su Fengnian laughed and stood up. He slowly said, "I won't listen to the book today." When Su Fengnian left the carriage, Jiang and I was in a daze and was a bit annoyed. The old man asked, "Little girl Jiang, how was it? Do you want to learn some skills from this old man?" He didn't expect Jiang and I to say without hesitation, "Learn what?" The old man was puzzled. Why not? Back then, the number of idiots that begged this old man to be his disciple could line up from Beiliang all the way to Donghai. Jiang and I coldly said, "If I learned from you, Su Fengnian would have killed me a long time ago." The old man raised his sparse eyebrows. "He dares?" Jiang and I put the book back into the box and sighed. "Besides, you're only good at talking. Learning from you won't amount to much." The old man held his stomach and laughed. He almost rolled around in the carriage. Jiang and I angrily said, "What are you laughing at?" The old man sat up straight and mysteriously whispered, "Do you know who this old man is?" Jiang and I calmly said, "Why should I care who you are?" The old man rubbed his chin and lay in the carriage. He crossed his legs and muttered to himself, "That's true. Even this old man has almost forgotten who he is. Who would remember the wooden horse and ox?" Chapter 96. Su Fengnian rode the red date horse that was originally assigned to Yue and looked up at the gray sky. If nothing unexpected happened, there would be a heavy rain tonight. Based on their current speed, they could stay in Hingshui City at dusk and not travel in the rain. Lu Qiantang, who carried the red cloud sword, led the way at the front. Xu Xiu and Yang Qingfeng, who did not carry weapons, were in charge of bringing up the rear. In the middle, the old Daoist priest, Wei Shuyang, spurred the horse's belly and rode side by side with Su Fengnian. These 4 personal retainers all had the strength of around the 2nd rank. Even if they were to face off against a half-immortal like Dong Tai and Chao Guanzi, who occupied the thrones of the top masters, they still had the strength to fight. At the very least, they could hold off the cross-eyed old man in the carriage until he finished buttoning his feet and digging his nose. Su Fengnian asked softly, "Grandpa Wei, what is the strength of the top 10 masters? Can you explain it in simpler terms?" Apart from Wang Xianxia, who can't be judged by common sense, the remaining 9 people, including Deng Tai, the leader of the new generation of swordsmanship, Wang Mao, who uses a broken arc spear, and Chao Guanzi, are obviously in a higher realm than the other 6. I reckon that the so-called top 10 experts in the world are just more famous, but there should be quite a number of people whose real strength is similar to the other 6. This group of people can be divided into 2 realms. Based on my deduction, I think that the great spiritual master in our sect said that the first-class 4 levels are divided into the Vajra level, finger level, and celestial level. Only those in the Vajra level can be considered to have reached a higher level in martial arts. Lu Pu, who is responsible for guarding Li Yuanying in the Tide Listening Pavilion, and Chu Kuangnu, can probably be ranked in this category. As for the celestial level, which is one of the higher levels, I can't say anything about it. I think that Jian Zhihuang, who escorted His Highness on a journey of 6,000 miles, is in between the two realms. Deng Tai, Yi, Wang Mao, and Chao Guanzi probably entered the celestial level at different times. Only Wang Xinji has been in the celestial level for half of his life. It's really too high to reach, too high to reach. Su Fengyan asked softly, Grandpa Wei, did you miss the last realm? Wei Xiang laughed. Back then, the great spiritual master only said that reaching this realm would make one in earth immortal. I thought that if there was someone in the human world with such supernatural powers, it would only be Wang Xianxia. Tracing back further, Qi Xuanzhen of Mount Longhu and old celestial master Zhao, who changed the late emperor's fate, could be counted in. However, every 100 years, the Wu family's sword tomb would produce an earth immortal sword. After some calculation, it's about time for them to appear. As for the two Zen temples, it's hard to say. There might be a golden arhat sitting there in the holy land of Buddhism. However, when I was as young as His Royal Highness, there were a few masters whose names were known everywhere. They were collectively known as the 4 great grandmasters. They were more deserving of their fame than the 10 great masters of today. The red armor talisman general in the south was wrapped in a bright red armor. His face could not be seen. The ancestor of Fengdu in the west was a woman in a green robe. The third one is in Arbaliang. It's the spear immortal Wang Xiu. Su Fengyan laughed coldly. I've heard a little about this. Chen Zhibao learned the spear art from him. In the end, this great spear master still died in the hands of his disciple. Wei Xiang stroked his beard and smiled. The last one is the most famous. No matter how many people in the world learned the sword, they couldn't avoid this mountain peak. At that time, as long as he was there, no one dared to claim that their swordsmanship was superior. It's the same as Wang Xinji claiming to be second and no one claiming to be first. Does His Royal Highness already know who he is? Su Fengyan nodded. The god of swords, Li Chungang. The wooden bowl in his hands was broken by Wang Xinji's fingers. There's been no news of him since then. Wei Shuyang, who also had a period of youth, sighed with emotion. There are geniuses in every generation of the martial world who stand at the top for 50 years. It's said that when God of Swords roamed the martial world, his swordsmanship was the best in the world. His elegance was unparalleled. At that time, there was no woman in the world who wasn't infatuated with God of Swords. Even the green-robed woman in Fengdu was willing to be pierced by the wooden bowl. When I was young, I always dreamed of meeting God of Swords when I went out one day. I would be satisfied if I could talk to him. When he found out that Wang Xinji defeated him, he couldn't accept it for a long time. He wanted to fight Wang Xinji to the death. I had already learned the sword for more than 10 years. Later on, I gave up the sword to cultivate. The main reason was because of God of Swords' retirement. A youth who doesn't roam the martial world with a sword isn't a youth with ambition. Su Fengyan was amused by Grandpa Wei's youthful feelings. The haze in the carriage faded a little. He couldn't help but laugh. Grandpa Wei, did you also want to be a carefree swordsman when you were young? Old Daoist me squinted his eyes and smiled. Who hasn't been young before? I might as well tell His Royal Highness the truth. I even admired a few heroines in the past. Once, I finally got the chance to meet one of them. I couldn't help but blush and tremble. I couldn't say anything. Compared to His Royal Highness, it's like a Vajra realm and a heavenly image realm. Even 5 old Taoists combined can't compare. Su Fengyan and Wei Shuyang could be considered friends despite the difference in age. When they were young, he rode on the old Taoist's neck and peed mischievously. When he entered the Tide Listening Pavilion in his youth, he was also willing to listen to Grandpa Wei's stories about mountain spirits and immortals. If it wasn't for this, with Su Fengyan's shrewdness and stinginess in certain matters, would he have handed over the Wudong's deed of thorough comprehension to Wei Shuyang the moment he received it? He even allowed Wei Shuyang to copy it for future annotations. Did Su Fengyan really not know the preciousness of the deed of thorough comprehension? With the Great Yellow Hall's precious jade in front of him, the thin deed of thorough comprehension might be even thicker. Su Fengnian chuckled, Grandpa Wei, even if I have to dig 3 feet into the ground in the martial world, I'll help you dig that Li Chungang out. Chapter 97. The old Daoist shook his head and said, even I have to enter the coffin. Maybe old Immortal Li has already passed away. Don't hope, don't hope. On the carriage, Jiang Ni's ears were sharp. She heard the words wooden bull. The reason why she was so sensitive to this title was because of the absurd story of her royal uncle. Before West Chu was defeated, her royal uncle spent a lot of money to buy half of the wooden bull, which was a 2-inch sword tip. He tried to make the sword tip into a dagger comparable to the divine talisman. He even thought of a name, Naive. He wanted to give it to his beloved niece, Princess Taiping, to make it a pair with the divine talisman. Unfortunately, before the dagger was made, West Chu was defeated at the Western Fortress. Ginger sized up the disheveled old man who was dozing off and asked softly, You mentioned the Trojan cow? The old man looked disheartened and said indifferently, No. Jiang and I curled her lips and said, I know you are Li Chungang, sword god or something. The old man opened his eyes and said in surprise, Even Su Fengnian, that extremely shrewd boy, didn't dare to think in this direction. Little girl, you determined that this old man is that thing's sword god after hearing 3 words? Does this old man look like one? Jiang Ni's legs were numb from squatting. She took turns to straighten one of her legs and said indifferently, So what if he doesn't look like one? Aren't you? The old man sat up and looked at the slender girl in front of him and said, Since you think I am Li Chungang, you don't want to learn the sword from me? Jiang and I shook her head and said, These are 2 different things. I have already told you the reason. The more powerful you are, the faster I will die. The old man was so depressed that he couldn't be any more depressed. He said in a more serious tone, Even if this old man isn't Li Chungang, I still have at least 50 to 60% of my peak strength. Believe it or not, if this old man wants to kill Su Fengnian, I can go out right now and take off this kid's head. Jiang and I sneered and said, See, I told you that you are the best at talking. Go and kill him. I don't believe Su Shao will let you mess around. The old man was deep in thought. Jiang and I picked up the 1,000 Swordgrass Compendium again and said, It's none of my business who you are. Besides, I can kill Su Fengnian, but you can't. But even if I can't stop you, I won't stop you. Moreover, you might have made a deal with Su Fengnian to test me. The old man shook his head and said with a helpless smile, Girl, you do have some resemblance to that princess whose sword will is said to be majestic. This old man just couldn't understand. If it wasn't for Su Shao, that scoundrel, who made that woman change from the sword of birth to the sword of life, she would have had at most another 10 years to polish her vigorous sword will. At that time, even this old man and Wang Xianxia, who was lucky enough to win against the wooden horse ox, wouldn't have dared to say that they could win against her. Now that the woman is gone and you are here again. This old man felt suffocated and uncomfortable just thinking about it. Since you don't want to learn the sword, this old man won't force you. Actually, if you can't get rid of your obsession, even if you learn the sword, you might not be able to reach the peak. At that time, this old man will destroy a piece of unpolished jade. Killing people can't win against saving people. That Daoist Chi argued with me back then. I talked about my sword and he talked about his heaven's way. No one could win against the other. Later on, he killed the devil on the demon-slaying platform and ascended to immortality, but I lost to Wang Xianxia. Then I figured out that if you want to reach the state of immortality, you must save people. The old man was surprised. His turbid eyes shone with a strange light like the vast sword aura. He murmured a few words of killing people to save people. Then he stared at the confused Jiang and I and said with a smile, Little girl, it's a pity that you don't learn the sword. If you change your mind one day, come back and find this old man. Jiang and I just read the book and didn't care about the old man. This old man seemed to be the sword god Li Chungang. She suddenly popped her head out and asked softly, You said that Su Fengnian has half of your talent. You also said that he practiced the sword late and was destined to be useless. Then what's the use of me secretly learning the sword from you? The old man didn't understand the reason behind it. It took him a while to sort it out. It seemed that this little girl was used to being bullied by Su Fengnian. She began to admit that she wasn't as smart as him. After figuring this out, the old man who was unlike the sword god Li Chungang said patiently, "Your talent isn't worse than that kid. What are you afraid of?" Jiang Ni's eyes brightened but quickly returned to coldness. She said with a bitter face, "Forget it. Practicing the sword is very difficult. I'd better study." Well, the little mud man who loved the vegetable garden the most on Mount Wudong must have been secretly shocked by Su Fengyan's crazy sword practice. Poor old god of swords Li. Fortunately, there was an old admirer not far from the carriage. The old man who had never begged anyone in his life and only received countless kowtows wanted to kill himself. What kind of reason was this? The old man calmed himself down and told himself that this was good. This little girl's unreasonable spirit was what he liked the most. When had Li Chungang ever talked reason with people and the world? Easy matters, difficult matters, stormy matters, Jianghu matters, matters of the dynasty, matters of the world. It was all just a matter of one sword. Jiang and I rolled up her sleeves and gently untied the ribbon around the dagger. The old man was stunned. "What? It's fine if you don't want to learn the sword, but you want to risk your life with me," this old man, who rarely shows kindness. He really didn't understand the way of the world, which was in such a mess. Unexpectedly, Jiang and I, who admitted that she wasn't very smart and was afraid of suffering, handed over the divine talisman and said softly, "Here, I'm not giving it to you. I'm lending it to you." The old man slowly took the divine talisman and suppressed the waves in his heart. He asked softly, "Why?" The little girl hid her head behind the secret book again and said softly, "There's no one in this world that's good to me. You seem to be quite good." The old man, who only had one arm and no longer had the wooden bowl, didn't have any change in expression. He just sat there silently. Still hiding behind the book, Jiang and I repeated, "I don't want to learn the sword." Chapter 98. Yu Yuwei was happily riding the horse and was addicted to it. No matter how Su Fengyan threatened and enticed her with words, she was unwilling to get off the horse and get on the carriage. Su Fengyan saw that her horsemanship was ordinary, and her slender jade-like hands were already red from holding the reins, so he could not help but feel a little annoyed. Only a person like him who had traveled the Jianghu would know that although those heroines with beautiful faces were beautiful, they could not bear to be looked at carefully. After riding for a long time, their buttocks were definitely not smooth and round. After holding swords and sabers for a long time, the calluses on their hands were even more unbearable to look at. Could it be that Yu Yuwei was going to follow in his footsteps? Su Fengyan snorted coldly, put 2 fingers between his lips, and blew a sharp whistle. The blue and white wand that Yu Yuwei had painstakingly trained broke through the dark clouds and directly pierced the white cat in Yu Yuwei's arms, Wumenyang. The big white cat, which had been pampered and was no more courageous than a mouse, had its snow-white fur standing up. It let out a miserable shriek. Yue was so scared that her face turned pale. Since the day she picked up this white cat and named it Wumenyang, it had been her only family member. This 6-year phoenix, the most handsome bird in Liaodong, only swooped back and forth, not harming the white cat. However, Wumenyang was scared out of her wits. Even Yu Yue looked at Su Fengyan with an exceptionally sorrowful expression. Su Fengyan, who was talking cheerfully with the old Taoist priest Wei Shuyang, pretended not to see anything. Yu Yue had no choice but to get off the horse bitterly and get into the carriage to face the overly casual old man wearing a sheepskin coat. Shu Xiu, who had originally wanted to use her beauty to entice His Royal Highness to surprise him, felt a chill in her heart when she saw this scene. She originally thought that the maidservant in the carriage had spiritual energy, but she was still young, and the taste of a green peach could not compare to that of a ripe peach. As for the maidservant driving the carriage, her appearance was not bad, and her figure could be considered graceful, but her temperament was too cold. With one glance, one could tell that she was a woman who did not know how to warm a bed. In the end, only the maidservant holding the white cat was the most threatening. Her 2 buttocks were full of charm when she got on and off the horse. Even Shu Xiu, who was also a woman, felt tempted when she looked at this scene. His Royal Highness was a veteran in the field of flowers, so why did he bring this lady who raised a cat along on this journey? Wasn't it to quench his thirst? Since you like this, why can't I go up and make up the numbers? 1 dragon and 2 phoenixes, a pair of swallows. But why did His Royal Highness not seem to dote on her? It was rumored that His Royal Highness was willing to do all kinds of absurd things for the sake of those Baelyang courtesans. Fortunately, the Great Pillar Country was a big enterprise, and the local rich and powerful families could not afford such extravagance. For a moment, Xu Xiu was somewhat dispirited. Her most powerful skill was not her internal energy or assassination, but her disguise technique. As long as she was given a portrait, a complete set of disguise equipment, she could transform into that person in half a day, almost passing off the fake as the real one. Just imagine, if he had Xu Xiu, wasn't it the same as having the face of all the beauties in the world? Not to mention how much she resembled the face, 80 to 90% of the appearance was absolutely at her fingertips. The problem was that Xu Xiu was not familiar with His Royal Highness. She could not understand his temperament and taste, so how could she know who the beauty in his heart was? Even if she had an accurate portrait, if she were to add feet to a snake, Xu Xiu's courage would shatter when she thought of the Great Pillar Country that was said to have hundreds of thousands of resentful ghosts on his back. If there was no Great Pillar Country that covered the sky with one hand, life would be easy. This disrespectful thought only flashed through Xu Xiu's mind, and she wanted to slap herself in the face. After entering Yongzhou, Su Fengyan was not the son of this old man of the astronomical department. He could accurately predict the weather, and this storm came earlier than he expected. Thus, he did not take the official road, but took a shortcut to the predetermined resting place. His Royal Highness changed the itinerary on the spur of the moment, causing a group of people who were full of enthusiasm to suffer. To the north of Yongzhou, Yingliang County's gates were not only wide open. A group of officials, ranging from rank 8 to rank 6, were all 30 li out of the city, patiently waiting for His Royal Highness's arrival in a pavilion. The civil officials were led by Zheng Hanhai. He was a fat old man in his 60s. As the Assistant Secretary of Yongzhou, he was in charge of half of the province's financial records. He had fought for this position for many years, but he was always unlucky. The Yongzhou Assistant Secretary had changed quite a few times, but Zheng Hanhai's had taken root in the position. As an old civil official with a Jinshe background, he was unfortunately on leave in his hometown, Yingliang County, and was given such a difficult task. He could only drag his old and sickly body out. The military official deputy commandant of the Eastern Forbidden City, Tang Yinshan, was the leader. His rank was 300 meters, and he was not outstanding. What made people not dare to underestimate him was that Deputy Commandant Tang Yinshan could command 200 soldiers. In the recent years of the dynasty, no matter how strong the civil officials were, the scholars of the four halls all seemed to become civil officials with a Jinshe background overnight. They gathered in the four halls, and their power suppressed others. However, this was a matter of the capital. Not to mention Baelyang, where it was rumored that one could hear the sound of iron hooves in one's sleep. In Yongzhou, the military officials were still ahead above the civil officials. In his early years, Tang Yinshan's family was in decline. He could not compare with the scholars who came from the Yongzhou's rich and powerful clans. He could not study the classics, so he gave up his brush and joined the army. He was able to accumulate a considerable amount of merit at the end of the Spring and Autumn War. He was able to obtain an official position with an ordinary salary, but he was able to hold military power in his hands. It was enough. Chapter 99. Tang Yinshan looked down on this group of civil officials and military officers who all carried umbrellas behind them. Zheng Hanhai, on the other hand, did not like the arrogance of this group of boorish men in armor. Today, Tianxia Yanqing Ping, what was the use of these martial artists who did not know how to read a lot of characters to argue with martial artists? Soldiers were the weapons of the country. Millions of people had died in the 8 kingdoms of Spring and Autumn. Almost all of them were killed in one breath by these martial artists. What else could they do? In order to govern a country with economy on the back of a horse and in the imperial court, it was better for scholars to do so. Zheng Hanhai did not give Tang Yinshan and his group of generals any face, but he was quite courteous to the Yingzhou officials around him, whose rank was a level lower than his own. The 60-year-old fatty Zheng Hanhai had immersed himself in officialdom for the greater part of his life. How could he not know that in the future, when the pen in his hand could no longer touch Yongzhou's finances, it would be terrifying when the tea cools after people leave. If he did not lower himself to build good karma at this time, it would be too late by the time he retired and returned to his hometown. Yingzhou County Magistrate Jean Lanting used a handkerchief to wipe away the sweat on his neck from the damned weather. He carefully asked with a smile, "Minister Zheng, Minister Chao, it's going to rain today, and it's going to be heavy. When will His Royal Highness arrive?" Zheng Hanhai smiled. "Lanting, you don't understand. It's good that it's raining. This time, when His Highness the Crown Prince came to Yingzhou, it was not easy for me to fight for His Highness the Crown Prince to stay in your private residence. There are lotus flowers in the lake and banana trees in the courtyard. If it was not raining, would His Highness be able to feel the sound of the rain hitting the banana trees in your residence? Furthermore, welcoming guests in the rain shows sincerity." Jean Lanting understood immediately, but he said, "I'm just worried that Elder Zheng will catch a cold." The heavy rain suddenly came. The raindrops the size of soybeans hit the armor of the officials, making an intense sound. Even those who did not have the right to stand in the pavilion did not move, allowing the rain to hit them. They were all generals of the dynasty who were ranked second only to the Great Pillar country. They wanted to show His Royal Highness, who had borrowed his father's meritorious service, that Bailiang's 300,000 cavalrymen were not the only valiant soldiers in the world. The pitiful civil officials were like banana trees that could not withstand being tossed around, trembling in fear. Their umbrellas were completely useless. The thin Jean Lanting could not take care of himself as he struggled to hold up an umbrella for Zheng Hanhai, who was about twice his weight, to shelter himself from the wind and rain. The servants and attendants were so busy that they were in a complete mess. Some of the more active ones even began to think about how to cook some hot soup to warm up their masters. In the north of Yongzhou, there was heavy rain and thunder. On the east side of Bailiang, it was drizzling. Su Xiao and his chief advisor Li Yishan were riding in the same carriage. Outside the carriage, there were 200 heavily armored cavalrymen. The horses' hooves splashed the mud, and the military formation was strict. Su Xiao lifted the curtain and looked at the mountainous terrain. He chuckled and said, "Yuanying, there's no need to send me off. You can go home with Lu Pu." Li Yishan nodded. He wanted to say something but stopped himself. De Zhugua knew what this scholar was thinking and smiled. Su Xiao is indeed domineering, but he's not a reckless fool. I didn't come to the capital on a whim to argue with those scholars. No matter how much the current Grand Secretary Zhang Julu makes me unhappy, he still has to be respectful and humble compared to Grand Tutor Zhou, who knocked his head against me outside Kuanji Hall. That old man Zhou, who was the leader of half of the court scholars, couldn't beat me when it came to scolding, let alone fighting. However, he was still a man of character. This Zhang Julu, who had been Grand Tutor Zhou's lackey for a full 20 years before rising to prominence, isn't quite the same. He's a rare scholar who can achieve great things. He was willing to join hands with Gu Jiantang, and even convinced Gu Jiantang, the Defender General of the state, to pacify a group of military officials, and retreated again and again. This shows that this young Grand Secretary, who has never interacted with me before, is very scheming. He isn't old, but his patience is superb. Scholars use their brushes to hurt and kill people. They're more ruthless than anything else. Not to mention whether the Bailiang Frontier Army's Iron Cavalry will be targeted, just for the sake of those old soldiers who've only been living a peaceful life for a few years. I have to go take a look. I have to let these civil officials who don't know the tragedy of war know that Su Xiao hasn't reached the point where he can't ride a horse yet. Li Yishan said lightly, "Back then, between you and Gu Jiantang, who would be the leader of all the military officials in the imperial court and who would be sent out to take on the infamy of being the second emperor, you argued endlessly. Even the Grand Chancellor of the Xianxia Academy was plotting behind the scenes. The late emperor stood his ground against all opposition and was willing to place you in Bailiang instead of Gu Jiantang, who was easier to control. His breadth of mind was worthy of the 4 words stalwart and magnificent on the tide-listening pavilion. Only, the 9 dragons plaque hanging there might have been a reminder to you." Su Xiao laughed. The late emperor was good at everything, but he was too obsessed with the scheming of an emperor. Speaking of breadth of mind, Li Shan, you're wrong. How could I have rebelled in the Battle of the Western Wall? How could the late emperor not have seen through it? But he still allowed 14 of my former subordinates of Bailiang to die in front of the palace. But wasn't it because he found them an eyesore? Li Shan shook his head. Your resentment hasn't dissipated yet? Su Xiao laughed coldly. Since when was Su Xiao a magnanimous person? Li Shan stared at Dezhugua's face and asked in a low voice, Are you really just going to see Zhang Julu's skills? Su Xiao laughed. Some people only slept soundly when they saw Su Xiao's hunched back and lame legs. It wasn't easy for him to sit on the dragon throne, but he never slept well. Even I feel sorry for him. Li Shan smiled wryly. He was just about to get off the carriage when Su Xiao said softly, There are 10 rounds of listening to the tide. Ishan might win the 9th round. With his back to Dezhugua, Li Ishan lifted the curtain and said with emotion, It'll be my win if you come back alive. Dezhugua scolded jokingly, Nonsense, I'm willing to die. If I don't seek death, who can kill me, Su Xiao? Li Ishan, who had been suppressing his anger for the past few days, suddenly felt relieved. He got out of the car and bowed. Lowering his head, he said sincerely, I implore the Pillar State to kill fewer students this time. We've killed enough in the Spring and Autumn War. Su Xiao smiled and said, Yuaning, your pedantic scholarly aura is the most undesirable. Back then, Zhao Chongling was much more slick than you. Li Shan took over the reins of the servant guard Lu Pu and said disapprovingly, Zhao Chongling, the first of Jiangzhou, is good at strategizing. Even if he is alive today, he can't get along with your son and will be a headache for you. Su Xiao put down the curtain and passed with a smile. On a small path at the border of Yongzhou, Lu Qiantang, who could barely open his eyes, suddenly stopped his horse and pulled out his sword. He could faintly see a long-lost red-armored seal general at the end of the path. Chapter 100. There's an activity for decisive heroes to find the most satisfying chapters. For details, see the chapters related to the novel and the top post in the book review section. The time limit is 2 weeks. The strange figure in bright red armor was like a divine soldier. He stood in the middle of the path without holding any weapons. The thick helmet seemed to cover his entire face. In the pouring rain, the strong armored figure was surrounded by fog. Judu Taoist Mi Wei Shuyang cried out in shock. The Southern Kingdom's talisman General Red Armor has long been dead. It said that he tried to assassinate the late emperor. He was stripped of his armor and skin by the eunuch who scolded him as a human cat. His corpse and armor were hung on a royal flag. Many Jianghu people who went there in admiration saw the bloody scene with their own eyes. That bright red armor was unique in the world, and it was confirmed by Chao Guanzi. It can't be faked. What's up with this red armor figure? The caravan had stopped. Xu Xiu and Yang Qingfeng rode their horses to Lu Qiantang's side, looking nervous. The 3 secret manuals were not easy to obtain. Most of the assassins who dared to provoke His Royal Highness were powerful. Moreover, the person in front of them had appeared openly on the road. Just his courage alone made the 3 of them feel inferior. The ups and downs of the political world were a test of one's ability to observe people's expressions. In Jianghu, one had to observe each other's temperament. The biggest taboo was to make a mistake. Otherwise, no matter how powerful one was, there would be a day when they would fail miserably. Didn't the sword god Li Chungang, a peerless master in the mystic understanding realm, lose to Wang Xinji, who was just a newborn calf at that time? To be more specific, Wu Luding, the young swordsman who appeared in the Wu family's sword tomb, never said who he was or where he came from. He only headed south, killing with his sword. Those who died to his one-handed withered sword were unlucky people who often got their shoes wet while walking by the river. Su Fengyan was not anxious. He only stared at the talisman General Red Armor figure with wide eyes. He asked with interest, Grandpa Wei, what is this talisman General Red Armor figure? Does it look extra ferocious just by wearing red armor? Then I'll have to get one to wear. 9 bushels old Taoist Mi smiled bitterly. Your Highness, this isn't something you can wear casually. Back then, the origins of the red armor were unknown. There were only some rumors saying that it was an ancient armor from the Taoist master manor of Mount Longhu. Mount Longhu had been passed down for a few generations, and a few Taoist masters had drawn talismans on it. It was probably a Daoist immortal weapon used to suppress evil spirits. However, it somehow ended up in the Jianghu. First, it was obtained by the heavenly secret sect of the Xianxia Academy. After doing all sorts of strange things to it, Mount Longhu almost fought with the Xianxia Academy because of it. When it reappeared in the Jianghu, it was draped over the body of the red-armored man, making it invulnerable to weapons and invulnerable to fire and water. However, the armored man was like a walking corpse. Dying in the hands of the great official Han Shengxian was not necessarily a kind of release. The talisman red-armored man in front of us seems to be slightly different from the rumors. He waved his hand to reject Bluebird's offer of an umbrella and called the 6-year phoenix to his arm. At this moment, Su Fengnian, who was drenched like a drowned rat, was still in the mood to tease the green and white Luan. He jokingly said, "Perhaps they are the children of the talisman general red-armored man from back then. Since the older one is a talisman general, then let's call the younger one a talisman soldier. Grandpa Wei, what do you think?" Wei Shuyang's 3 strands of white beard had turned into 3 small braids after being soaked in water. When he reached out to touch it again, he naturally couldn't feel the demeanor of an immortal anymore. He awkwardly withdrew his hand and slowly said, "Your Highness's way of saying things is really unconstrained." Su Fengnian smiled mischievously and said, "Grandpa Wei, your flattery is really something." The old man and the young man laughed heartily, subtly dispelling the monstrous killing intent at the end of the path. Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and said softly, "Lu Qiantong's red cloud sword, Shu Xiu's embracing simplicity spell, and Yang Qingfeng's art of controlling ghosts. I want to see if these 3 people are qualified to make it to the martial emperor city alive." The old Taoist seemed to have not heard this ruthless sentence. He rode forward on his horse and was a dozen steps away from the carriage. With a shake of his sleeves, the rain above his head bounced away as if it had hit an iron plate. Lu Qiantang pulled out his sword and stopped the horse. After waiting for Shu Xiu and Yang Qingfeng to catch up, he spurred his horse and rushed forward. From the moment he picked up the crouching dragon mound sword controlling technique on the 5th floor of the Tide Listening Pavilion, he knew that he would have to risk his life today. It was just that it was much earlier than expected, but so what? If one wanted to learn how to control a sword, one had to use a strong opponent as a whetstone to sharpen one's sword heart to an incomparably pure level. Only then could one have a chance to obtain the essence of swordsmanship. As the old god of swords Li Chenggang said, "Open your mouth and spit out a magnificent sword aura, slashing out a vast field of stars." There were more than 100,000 young wanderers in the world who wanted to learn swordsmanship. Who didn't want to slash out with a sword that even ghosts, immortals, and Buddhas couldn't match? Lu Qiantong's figure was already very tall and sturdy, and the horse he was riding was even more rare. For a moment, the small path was trampled by the horse's hooves, causing mud to splash everywhere. One man and one horse were unstoppable. Perhaps because the swordsman Lv Qiantang had aroused his killing intent, even Shu Xiong, who only knew how to moan on the bed, gave a heavy snort. Amidst the muffled sound of the heavy rain hitting the small path, it was particularly ear-piercing. Yang Qingfeng, who didn't need to hold the reins, could still control the horse's running speed to perfection. She slowly bent down and placed her snow-white hands on the horse's neck. The empty-handed red-armored men of the southern kingdom stood still and let the 3 people and 3 horses charge forward. Through the dense curtain of rain, Lu Qiantang could almost see the clouds seal Sanskrit on the red armor. It was actually written in both Buddhism and Taoism. With just a glance, he felt the qi in his chest stagnate. Suppressing the distracting thoughts in his mind, he let out an angry roar and spat out the murky air in his heart. Borrowing the momentum of the galloping horse, he slashed out with a domineering sword strike. The curtain of rain was instantly torn apart. Unfortunately, the raindrops that came into contact with this huge sword seemed to have dripped onto a piece of hot iron. With a sizzling sound, they turned into a puff of smoke. The huge puppet, which was similar to the rumored red-armored man, stiffly but quickly raised one of its hands. Its 5 fingers, which were wrapped in red armor like its face, opened up and tried to grasp Lu Qiantong's sword strike that contained the essence, energy, spirit, and will of the most powerful sword strike in his life. As the red cloud sword and the red-armored man's 5 fingers brushed past each other, a series of sparks flew out. The red-armored man failed to grasp the sword, and Lu Qiantang, who was already famous in the southern Tang country at the age of 30, also failed to grasp the sword strike. Lu Qiantang took full advantage of the time and place to slash out this sword strike, but the red-armored man only stood still and gently raised his hand to resolve everything. Xu Xiu was surprised to see that Yang Qingfeng had sped up and rushed out. She actually wanted to use the horse to violently collide with the red-armored man. In the blink of an eye, Lu Qiantang and the red-armored man exchanged blows. Chapter 101. Yang Qingfeng, who had her hands on the horse's neck, suddenly jumped up. The horse, whose eyes were filled with blood, charged at the red-armored man as if it had gone mad. First, there was a loud boom. Then, even Su Fengyan, who was far away, heard the sound of bones breaking inch by inch, as if the horse had crashed into a mountain. The red-armored man didn't move an inch. The horse's head and neck had been broken, and it had died in front of him. Xu Xiu didn't care how powerful the red-armored man was, and she couldn't care less about the fear in her heart. She dismounted from the horse and leaped forward like a rabbit. She placed her white palms on the armor on the monster's chest and suddenly exerted her strength. With her and the monster as the center, countless raindrops exploded in the air. Xu Xiu's strength was, after all, vigorous internal energy. The red-armored man finally swayed a little. No matter if it moved an inch or a foot, as long as it moved, even if it didn't fall down, it was still 1,000,000 times better than not moving at all. Xu Xiu's attack hit its target, and she used the force to bounce back. Her feet drew a straight line in the mud, and the hem of her skirt was covered in mud. Lu Qiantang, who was behind the red-armored man, continued to charge forward with his horse. He fiercely pulled the reins, raised the horse's hooves, and stomped heavily on the ground, creating 2 holes in the muddy road. Lu Qiantang turned his horse around and took a deep breath. His expression was incomparably solemn. Yang Qingfeng, who had floated between Lu Qiantang and the red-armored man, was still expressionless. However, her hands were even paler, and the veins on the back of her hands were almost visible. The number of veins on her hands was much denser than that of a normal person's. The 3 of them working together only managed to make this strange armored man sway a little. Wei Xiang muttered to himself, "Fortunately, we can confirm that this isn't the red-armored man from the 4 great grandmasters. Could it be that His Royal Highness was right, and it's just an imitation?" Su Fengyan shouted, "Grandpa Wei, go and stop Ning Amei and the Phoenix Battalion. Leave this to the 3 of them." The old Daoist priest, who was about to lend a hand, was stunned for a moment before he left. Su Fengyan lightly squeezed the horse's belly and came to the side of the carriage. Bluebird, who was driving the carriage, held a delicate oil paper umbrella. It was the only graceful scene in this murderous, muddy path. Su Fengyan clicked his tongue and said, "As expected, only a battle to the death can reveal the true colors of an expert. Lu Qiantang's sword move is really at the peak of sword moves. Yang Qingfeng's trick only looks good, but it's nothing special. I really underestimated that woman Xu Xiu." Bluebird nodded and asked a very important question. "Your Highness, is there only one armored person? If the Phoenix Battalion doesn't come, wouldn't it be inappropriate?" Su Fengyan smiled and said, "How could there only be one talisman general red-armored puppet? Maybe there's a second or third one hiding in the dense forest. Maybe there are 4 or 5 of them altogether. Because I calculated that 2 red-armored puppets can easily get rid of Lu Qiantang and the other 2, and 1 red-armored puppet can get rid of 100 Phoenix Battalion. Even with the halberd Ning Amei holding the line, both sides will probably suffer. If another one comes, wouldn't we have to personally go into battle? The person in the carriage is a top secret. Even I don't know his identity. No matter how resourceful the red-armored puppet's master is, he wouldn't be able to guess it. Therefore, with a snap of his fingers, the remaining red-armored puppet and the expert behind the scenes would be able to easily take my head. If it's really as I think, without the old man in the sheepskin fur coat, then I'll be in trouble. Even if you are the kamikaze warrior, 3rd, that Su Xiao painstakingly cultivated and can fight to the death with a puppet, you may not be able to guarantee that I will reach Yingzhu alive. Blue Bird looked at the calm face of His Royal Highness. She lowered her head and said softly, "It's Blue Bird who is useless." Su Fengnian shook his head and smiled. "To me, it's not that a useless person isn't an expert, it's that they aren't willing to give their life to me." "Ah, Blue Bird, raise your head. I like to see your cold and elegant appearance. Compared to those heroines who don't live up to their titles, you are much more beautiful and moving." Blue Bird's face reddened. Su Fengnian looked at the hostile battlefield. With a shake of his arm, he released Qin Bai Luan. His hands pressed down on Xiu Dong and Spring Thunder respectively. He smiled nastily. "Although this is the worst-case scenario with my status, I reckon it's worth it for them to treat me so seriously." Motherf asterisk Ker, 5 puppets. Are they going to play a game of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth? The curtain behind Blue Bird lifted up a corner. 2 heads popped out, one above and one below. Jiang and I didn't say anything. He just stared with his eyes wide open. The old man pulled out the sandalwood from his hair bun. Instead, he inserted something that Su Fengnian couldn't think of. Divine talisman. What were these 2 clowns doing? The old man squinted his eyes and smiled. "Boy, your brain is really not bad. Your 3 useless subordinates are up against the water armor of the red armor talisman. Look at the weather. If you don't throw them out to calm the situation, wouldn't it be a waste of your status?" This old man kindly reminded you that the earth armor talisman might come out from under your horse's belly and tear you in half. The fire armor talisman is standing on a hillside 600 steps northeast of you. The wood armor talisman is squatting on a tree 300 steps southwest of you. As for the gold armor talisman, did he not come? Or was his presence concealed by an expert? Or did he go to cause trouble for your Phoenix Battalion's light cavalry? You really make this old man worry. Why don't you give me a straightforward answer? The little girl and I will go back to Liangzhou. Fighting and killing is boring. At most, we'll call someone to help you collect your corpse." Su Fengnian smiled. "Then let me guess. Su Xiao and you have 3 rules. Did he mention that you are not allowed to touch weapons?" The old man opened his eyes wide and stretched out his single arm to show his innocence. "Kid, what does this old man have in his hand?" Su Fengnian stretched out a hand. "Give the talisman to me for safekeeping." Jiang and I loudly protested. "That's mine." Su Fengnian ignored this naive little clay figurine and only stared at the old man. The old man shook his head. "Forget it. Remember, this old man didn't make a move for you. It's for the little girl." Su Fengnian smiled and retracted his hand. His meaning couldn't be more obvious. Jiang and I was so angry that his cheeks puffed up. He couldn't wait to take back the talisman and stab that cunning fox's face 100 times. In a trance, the old man had already bent over and walked out of the carriage unhurriedly. He stretched out his finger and flicked. A drop of water was flicked and floated away. Su Fengnian suddenly turned his head and followed this unremarkable drop of water to the end of the path. 1 drop, 2 drops, 10 drops. Hundreds and thousands of drops. Connected into a line. Converged into a sword. From Su Fengnian's side, it went straight to the chest of the red-armored talisman general. The water sword lightly pierced through that undefeatable talisman general water-armored talisman general. The sword energy that filled the sky burst apart. That puppet collapsed with a loud bang. Su Fengnian was dumbstruck and quickly closed his eyes. Between heaven and earth, everything returned to silence. Su Fengnian repeatedly imagined the trajectory of the sword energy that was like an azure dragon emerging from water. Water sword against water armor. Grandpa Wei, you said that grade 1 had 4 levels. Above Vajra was Xian. It turned out that a flick of Xian was Xian. Chapter 102. Shu Xian stood dumbstruck, not daring to move. This water sword just happened to shoot over the top of her head, messing up her fine black hair. The purple silk handkerchief that was used to stabilize her hair bun fell into the mud. Her body, which was wrapped around her exquisite figure, fluttered forward. The water sword formed a thin line, but it contained an astonishing sword aura. Shu Xiu's ears rumbled for a long time. The pale-faced Shu Xiu, who did not use a sword, was already so shocked. Lu Qiantang, who had studied the way of the sword for 30 years, opened his mouth slightly. The superior sword was always the way of the sword, not the art of the sword. The majestic and weak sword aura had no direct relationship with the size of the sword aura. The old man on the horse carriage's finger was indeed very similar to the tide of the Guangling River in his hometown. Every year on the 18th day of the 8th lunar month, the spectacular scene was unparalleled in the world. Lu Qiantang had built a thatched cottage near the sea salt pavilion on the Guangling River, which was the most suitable place to admire the midnight tide of 100,000 soldiers. Lu Qiantang looked at the horse carriage. The figure of the old man with the sheepskin fur coat was blurry. He muttered in his heart. Among the 6 guards of the martial library, he had never heard of a grandmaster of the way of the sword with such a tyrannical sword aura. Lu Qiantang pondered, but he still did not dare to lower his guard. Together with Yang Qingfeng, he stared fixedly at the red-armored man who had fallen to the ground. Lu Qiantang discovered that the hands of this weak middle-aged man were bleeding. At some point in time, he had drawn a talisman with blood on the back of his hands, which the heavy rain could not wash away. As for whether it was the talisman of the Longhu Daoist master or the Maoshan exorcism spell, Lu Qiantang was not proficient in this field, so he could not be sure. Yang Qingfeng squatted on the ground, his 10 fingers digging into the mud. The mud immediately began to churn. What was even more surprising was that more than 10 silver-white mole crickets broke out of Yang Qingfeng's withered flesh. Su Fengnian frowned and asked, "Is this water armor dead?" The old man with a divine talisman pinned on his hair bun took the oil paper umbrella from Bluebird's hands and sneered, "It's easier said than done. Although these 5 red talisman armors are much weaker than Yi Hongting's yellow and purple fate armor, how can they be killed with just a finger?" Back then, when Yi Hongting fought against enemies in the Vajra realm, she would always be pestered to death for a few days and nights. Unless she was stripped of her armor and skin like Han Xingxian, no matter how severely she was injured or killed, Yi Hongting wouldn't feel any pain or itch. Condensing yellow and purple fate into armor is a great creation divine art. Now that the red armor is made according to the 5 elements, the 5 elements talisman will gather the red armor, and that will be the beginning of the show. Since this old man has made a move, he doesn't mind helping the Buddha to the west. No matter how difficult it is to deal with him, he is still not as disgusting as Yi Hongting. Found it. The old man looked towards the east. Bluebird's figure shot out. Since you're hiding and not willing to come out, this old man will break 1 armor first. Let's see if you still have the patience. The 5 elements lack water. Let's see how you guys are best at grinding. The old man only took 1 step, and the umbrella swept over Shu Xiu's head. He stepped down and stepped on the chest of the talisman general who was about to get up. It was exactly where the water droplet sword had exploded. Lu Qiantang's crimson afterglow sword and Yang Qingfeng's art of recuperation and exorcism were sent flying by the old man's move. It would be an understatement to say that he was unreasonable. However, Lu Qiantang and Yang Qingfeng didn't reveal the slightest bit of resentment. Instead, they took advantage of the situation to retreat. The old man with the umbrella stepped again and again, and the head of the water armor was stepped into the deep muddy pit. Not only that, he instantly closed the umbrella and used it as a sword. This time, compared to the Azure Dragon water sword formed by the water droplets, the sword intent was even more boundless. The rain that filled the sky was wrapped by this umbrella, forming a huge rain tornado around the old man. The old man who used the umbrella as a sword whispered, "One sword immortal kneels." The umbrella and the tornado pierced the head of the talisman general like the Milky Way. The pouring rain on the small path suddenly stopped. The raindrops didn't fall, but instead bounced back up, as if someone had used human strength to go against the heavenly Tao and forcefully stopped it. A soft slap sounded. The old man opened the oil paper umbrella again, and slowly walked back to the carriage. Bluebird lightly returned, shook her head and said, "The enemy retreated." Su Fengnian, who was sitting on the horse, still closed his eyes and concentrated. This should be a sword that only the land immortals can use, right? It was indeed correct that he didn't practice the sword first when he practiced the saber. If he had learned the sword earlier, and then witnessed today's finger and Xian swords, he would definitely have been traumatized and couldn't get rid of it. Although there was still a gap between him and the sword heart, sword chi, and sword intent, he probably wouldn't have the courage and confidence to use the sword again. In the battle between the saber and the sword, if one were to talk about the number of first-class masters, the two sides were about the same. But if one were to talk about the small group of people at the top, if one were to pick out a single person to fight, the Grand Master of the Sword would firmly suppress the Master of the Saber. Especially the Immortals who were known as the Sword God in the past generations in Jianghu. Which one of them wasn't a master who had almost reached the peak of martial arts? In the previous generation, Li Chungang was invincible with his wooden horse ox. In this generation, the number 1 swordsman, Dong Tai, even fooled around with a peach blossom, and no one dared to fight with him. Chao Guanzi, who was arrogant and domineering, also claimed that he was worthy of being above the 8 of them, but he was ashamed to be right behind Dong Tai. These words drew a clear line between Wang Xinji and Dong Tai and the other 8 masters, including Chao Guanzi. No matter how Wang Xinji was, the people of Jianghu had long regarded her as a person of the immortal realm in Tiange, but she was just a weirdo that appeared once in 500 years. Dong Tai was different. After all, he was tainted with some people's aura. The peach blossom sword god was a legend that even people in the palace missed. Su Fengyan asked softly, "The water armor is dead? The person behind the scenes has retreated?" The old man, who had shown off 2 moves without using a sword, was very arrogant. He ignored his royal highness and only smiled at Jiang and I, who actually did not see anything clearly. He asked, "Little girl, this old man still has some courage left, right?" Jiang and I only vaguely saw the torrential rain tornado, but she was a little far away. In addition, the layman only knew how to watch the show, so her degree of shock was far less than Lu Qiantang, Xu Xiu, and the others. Moreover, she was someone who had seen the world. In the past, Bai Hu Er's face was much more beautiful when she used 2 blades to sweep the wind and snow. The blades were beautiful, and the person was even more beautiful. Therefore, when the old god of swords made his move this time, he probably wouldn't be able to escape the fate of winking at a blind person. Seeing the little girl's confused expression, Li Chungang laughed out loud and reached out to touch the divine talisman. He was in a good mood. In the years when the wooden horse ox hadn't stopped, he was really tired of hearing flattery and gasps of cold air. It wasn't as comfortable as the little girl's confused expression. The old man handed the oil paper umbrella back to Bluebird. When he got into the carriage, he said casually, "The other side probably did not want to fight to the death with you, so they were willing to leave behind a water armor. If you move faster, you can still see some of the mysteries of this red talisman armor. If the puppet in the armor dies, the knowledge of the talisman writing on the red talisman armor will also be gone." Su Fengyan's expression was complicated. After a moment of hesitation, he bowed to the old man and urged his horse to the place where the wooden armor had been killed by the umbrella sword. Waving his hand to drive away Lu Qiantang and Yang Qingfeng, His Royal Highness squatted in front of the red talisman armor. The armor on the red talisman armor's head had already been shattered by the sword, but the characters and patterns carved on the red armor were exquisite beyond compare. What was Su Fengyan most proud of? Naturally, it was not his fledgling blade skills, but his memory. The red armor had been carved with the 3 pure talismans of Taoism and Sanskrit incantations of Buddhism. Su Fengyan could only understand half of it. This was attributed to him being a Buddhist follower of Wang Fei's mother. In addition, he had often heard Wei Shuyang talk about the grudges between the 3 Daoist talisman schools. Xu Xiu gathered her courage and wanted to shield His Royal Highness from the rain, but Su Fengyan, who was facing the red armor, coldly said, "Get lost." Xu Xiu's expression froze. The corner of Big Sword Lu Qiantang's mouth twitched slightly. Yang Qingfeng walked to a suitable distance away from His Royal Highness and the red armor talisman armor. He respectfully said, "His Royal Highness, this lowly one knows a little about talisman mechanisms. Can I take a closer look?" Su Fengyan did not raise his head. He only asked stiffly, "Can you preserve your soul for a little longer?" Yang Qingfeng bowed slightly and said confidently, "Yes. Don't disappoint me." Su Fengnian pulled out the spring thunder saber and lifted one of the red armor talisman's arms. He carefully examined every detail of the red armor talisman's arm. The red armor talisman's chest had been blasted open by the old man's finger. Most of it could no longer be distinguished, but the red armor talisman's arms and legs were intact. Chapter 103. Yang Qingfeng carefully squatted down. After a moment of surprise, he forced a smile and said, "His Royal Highness, this armored man seems to have been dead for a long time." Su Fengnian's movements on the corpse were as smooth as flowing water. He wasn't the slightest bit frightened by Yang Qingfeng's revelation. He frowned and said, "Seems?" Yang Qingfeng's heart skipped a beat. He said in a deep voice, "I'm sure." Su Fengnian didn't linger on this topic. He asked, "What clues do you have?" Yang Qingfeng stared at the red-armored man and said slowly, "As expected, most of the talismans came from Mount Longhu's Celestial Master sect. As the saying goes, water doesn't lie in its depth. The talismans of the Celestial Master sect are different from the talismans of Mount Gazao. Mount Longhu doesn't care if the talismans have a proper form. Your Highness the Crown Prince, look at the cloud pattern on the ancient seal script on your arm. This is Mount Longhu's most famous cloud seal. There are as many as 7 layers, but it's a pity that it's not the same as the 8 layers of purple cloud seal of the underworld. As for the most difficult 9 layers heavenly book, it only exists in the annals of Mount Longhu's history. This 9 palaces talisman is different. It comes from Mount Gazao's spiritual treasure mountain moving scripture. The difference can also be seen in the way the Qi practitioners use the brush. As for the image of the heavenly venerate on the left leg, it's unmistakably a Maoshan talisman. Its form is excellent, only a step away from the immortal grade. As for the Sanskrit scriptures, I don't dare to say anything. But I think there must be traces of the heavenly secret tower of the Xianxia Academy. Su Fengnian knocked on the armor with the spring lightning. The sound was crisp and clear. He pierced it with the tip of his saber, but there was no trace. He asked, "What is the material of this red armor?" Yang Qingfeng shook his head and said, "I don't know. This is the first time I've seen it." The corpse in the red armor gradually turned into ashes, and then it was beaten into the mud by the raindrops. As the old man said, the knowledge of the armor faded away, and in the end, only an incomplete armor was left. Su Fengnian stood up and put away the spring thunder saber. Just then, Wei Shuyang and Ning Yimei dismounted from their horses. Su Fengnian noticed that Ning Yimei's hand, which was holding the halberd, was bleeding profusely. There were only a few short halberds left in his backpack. This Wu Dian general knelt heavily in the mud and shouted with bloodshot eyes, "This general is incompetent. The Phoenix Battalion has lost more than 40 men, but we still couldn't stop that red-armored man. We only managed to cut off one of his arms. Ning Yimei only asked His Royal Highness to give this general 30 light cavalry to pursue and kill. If you can't take down that assassin, Ning Yimei will bring his head to me." Su Fengnian asked in surprise. General Ning cut off one of the armored man's arms. To the side, Wei Shuyang nodded gently. It was truly a bloody battle. Although the Phoenix Battalion was composed of light cavalry, no one was afraid of death or injury when faced with the unfathomable red-armored man. Especially with the battle formation that had been honed over the years, they displayed a strength that was beyond Wei Shuyang's imagination. Ning Yimei took the lead, his iron halberd sweeping away thousands of troops. In addition, the short halberd on his back whistled like the wind every time it was thrown. Yet, Ning Yimei had actually cut off one of the red-armored man's arms. Even though Wei Shuyang was a Daoist, he was still in Jianghu. In the past, it was inevitable that he had underestimated the martial artists on the battlefield. Today, after seeing it with his own eyes, he realized how invincible it was when the martial artists and valiant soldiers gathered together in a battle formation. Su Fengnian smiled and said calmly, "General Ning, you can bring the Phoenix Battalion back to Bailiang. I don't need you to worry about me anymore. How can Bailiang's elite be lost in Jianghu?" The burly Ning Yimei lowered his head and stuck the halberd in his hand into the ground. He gritted his teeth and said, "Ning Yimei is not willing. The Phoenix Battalion is not willing." Su Fengnian said expressionlessly, "Are they not afraid of death?" Ningame said in a deep voice, when have the Bailiang cavalry ever been afraid of death? They only know how to seek death in battle. Su Fengyan mounted the white horse and said indifferently, then follow. Ningame, send the dead soldiers back to the cold land first. I will slow down and wait for you. Ningame drew his halberd and left to carry out the order. The heavy rain continued to pour from the pitch-black sky to the earth without spending any money. The cavalry calmed down. Ningame went back to deal with the funeral arrangements. Lu Qiantang carried the red trophy armor on his back. Xu Xiu sat on the horse in a daze. Yang Qingfeng, who had always been a loner since childhood, had a rare smile on his old-fashioned face. This made Xu Xiu, who was riding side by side, come back to her senses and see it. When she saw it, she felt more and more depressed. Su Fengyan said self-deprecatingly, the Phoenix Battalion, for whom are they seeking death? 30 li out of the city, braving the rain to welcome Bailiang's second great noble. The officials of the Inyu Battalion, in their anxiety and fear, only waited until the courier sent a message that made them look at each other in dismay. His Royal Highness had already taken a shortcut and arrived at the city gate. Zheng Hanhai smiled bitterly and shook his head. He said to Jean Lanting, let's go. The deputy captain of the Dongjin Battalion, Tang Yinshan, spat on the ground. He walked out of the pavilion and said angrily, let's go back to the city. Su Fengyan was led by the humble and fearful officials of the city to the elegant scholar Jean Lanting's private residence. It occupied a large area and had a deep courtyard. He raised geese, planted lotuses and planted bananas. It was indeed a peaceful place with pleasant scenery. It was fortunate that the little Inyu Battalion could find such a good place with good feng shui. From beginning to end, the officials of the Inyu Battalion did not dare to say a word. It was no wonder that he was afraid of His Royal Highness like a wolf, a tiger, or a leopard. In the imperial court, there was a world of difference between officials. There were countless thresholds for officials. The 6th rank was a threshold, and the 3rd rank was another big threshold. Other than the officials of the border who held great power, those below the 3rd rank were just small carps that had not made the great leap. They were just slightly fatter than the other fish and shrimp. Only by wearing the 3rd rank peacock or tiger or leopard official robes could one be considered to have achieved success as an official. If one was a civil official, being able to exchange the 3rd rank peacock patch for a 2nd rank golden pheasant and finally for a 1st rank red-crowned crane, this was bringing honor to one's ancestors. Su Fengyan changed into a new set of clothes in his room. Bluebird helped him comb his hair. Su Fengyan took out the Yugong Geography Journal and laid it out on the table. He pointed at a few provinces and counties and said with a smile, look, the Yong and Quan provinces that border Bailiang. There are more than 10 people with real power. Regardless of whether they are civil or military officials, they all harbor enmity toward Su Shao. 1/3 of Great General Gu Jiantong's former subordinates are stationed in these 2 provinces. Within the borders of Yong province, I'm afraid that other than this Inyu Battalion, we won't be able to see any good faces. However, once we leave Yong province, the situation will take a turn for the better. In the past 2 years, Lu Qiu'er has bribed some of the old generals of Bailiang to hold power in the provinces and counties. When the time comes, it will be inevitable that there will be a few toasts. Perhaps there will be countless concubines and beautiful maids who will fight to warm my bed. Thinking back to the time when I was with old Huang in the middle of Yong province, I was robbed and lost my horse. In Ji province, I can't be mentioned in the same breath. Bluebird looked out the window and said, Jiang and I is holding a book and holding an umbrella in the courtyard while waiting. Su Fengyan said with a smile, she only has money in her eyes. Let her in. Bluebird led Jiang and I into the room. Su Fengyan pointed to a bag on the table that Bluebird was in charge of. He instructed Jiang and I, don't be in a hurry to read. Grind the ink first. I want to draw something. There was good quality rice paper in the room, but Su Fengyan was very good at writing. Jiang and I opened the bag and picked out a Guangdong Liaowei. However, when she saw the extremely familiar fire clay ancient inkstone on Mount Wudong, Jiang and I had already thrown this ancient inkstone, which was ranked 2nd by West Chu's imperial uncle, Jiang Taiya, into the elephant washing pool. How did it appear again? Jiang and I carefully examined and stroked it. She flipped through the bottom of the ancient inkstone and saw that it was indeed West Chu's million halberd warriors. Who can compete? Jiang and I used all her strength to hold the ancient inkstone that was warm in winter and cool in summer. She couldn't bear to use it to smash His Royal Highness, who was treacherous and shameless. She could only curse with reddened eyes. What's going on? Su Fengnian said with a smile, I gave it to you, but you threw it away. I'm a stingy person, so I went to the bottom of the elephant washing pool to pick it up. Jiang Ni's eyes were moist and her lips trembled. Su Fengnian imitated her tone perfectly. The divine talisman is mine. The fire clay ancient inkstone is mine. It's still mine. Jiang and I pounced on this bastard and shouted with a crying voice, I'll kill you. Su Fengnian turned his head to look at the Yugong geography record. He stretched out a leg to block the charging clay figurine and said softly, All right, stop fooling around. Take this ancient inkstone as a gift. Jiang and I cried with resentment, It was originally mine. You scoundrel. I'm going to learn the sword from Li Chungang and stab you to death. Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and fell into deep thought. Su Fengnian couldn't care less about the fact that he hadn't learned the sword art yet and could only use the ancient inkstone to smash the clay figurine on his knee. He clicked his tongue and said, Li Chungang? This old man's conduct really doesn't look like a sword god. Chapter 104. That old man with the sheepskin fur coat was the previous generation's god of swords, Li Chungang? From Su Fengnian's point of view, this was unexpected but reasonable. Thinking of Su Zhao's evaluation in the tide listening pavilion, plus the string of water swords and the umbrella sword were still vivid in his mind, it was all extremely shocking. Su Fengnian believed that Jiang Ni's mouth was without filter. It was best if it was Li Chungang. No matter how thin old Crane was, it was not comparable to chickens and ducks on the ground. So what if he lost to Wang Xianxia and had his wooden horse broken? This one-armed old man was still able to break the red armor with a single finger. If he was given a sharp sword, what kind of sword will he have? One of Su Fengnian's legs was smashed by Jiang Ni's priceless fire clay inkstone no less than 100 times. He frowned and said, If you continue smashing my legs will be fine, but your uncle Jiang Taiya's treasure will be destroyed. Even if you don't feel bad, I do. Jiang and I vented most of her anger and carefully hid the ancient inkstone. Actually, where could she hide it? Su Fengnian picked up a stack of cooked rice paper from the table. He was a little surprised. It was actually comparable to the Gangnamdu's tribute, De Qian Xian. He pulled out a thin piece of rice paper and shook it. It was as thin as an egg membrane, but surprisingly tough. Su Fengnian was in a good mood. He even had the thought of asking the owner of the house for a few dozen pieces of rice paper before he left. Thus, Su Fengnian didn't care if there was a fire clay inkstone or not. He personally grinded a natural toad-shaped yellow inkstone on the table. He took the Guangdong Liao Wei and set Jiang and I aside. Relying on his memory, he meticulously drew the mysterious pattern on the red armored man's armor. He used 4 pieces of rice paper on the red armored man's chest, back, hands, and feet. Then, he gradually separated the cloud seal heavenly script that was covered with multiple layers and drew it on a single page. Clouds swirled around, the star map was obscure, and there were many Buddhist Sanskrit words. It was truly an endless physical labor. Su Fengnian put his heart and soul into drawing these things. It was several times more strenuous than practicing with the knife. Unknowingly, the rain outside the window had long disappeared. Su Fengnian rubbed his eyes. His hands were covered in ink. Blue Bird gently walked into the room and handed over a hot towel. Su Fengnian wiped his face and hands. He looked tired. This work was too tiring. He was afraid that a single stroke would make a mistake. Blue Bird faintly said, Your Highness, those people outside the courtyard have been chased away by this servant. Su Fengnian let out a long breath. One of his hands subconsciously stroked the embroidered winter saber that was close at hand. He gently nodded and said, I'm busy right now. How can I have the mood to talk nonsense with them? If I think of something and don't have time to write it down, they might lose their official positions and jobs on the same day. Blue Bird, go and find out who the owner of this house is. Just by looking at it, the calligraphy, paintings, bronzes, steels, and name papers are not small. It's not something that can be displayed by an ordinary wealthy family. While you're at it, go and ask the table how many of these embroidered Xian scrolls are in stock. I want 50 to 60 pieces of embroidered Xian scrolls for use on the road. Bluebird nodded and left. From the corner of his eyes, Su Fengnian noticed that Jiang and I was tiptoeing and secretly peeking at the things he had drawn. He was too lazy to expose her. He would just treat it as repaying this lass for revealing his secret. Divine Swordsman and Wooden Horse Ox. When Su Fengnian remembered these two names, he could not help but associate them with those two swords. Su Fengnian stretched his neck. He picked up the embroidered Winter Saber and Spring Thunder Saber and went to the courtyard. Jiang and I held the secret manual and stood in the corridor. She was unwilling to leave. 1 copper coin per word. Today, she had earned a few taels less than usual. Su Fengnian concentrated and took out the Spring Thunder Saber. He imitated the old Divine Swordsman's posture of holding an umbrella and stabbed the saber into the ground. However, he only stabbed the Spring Thunder Saber into the stone slab. There was no sword intent to speak of. Su Fengnian stabbed it more than 10 times in succession. He could not do anything. He squatted on the ground and did not make a sound. The pattern on the talisman General Hongjia could be copied, but secretly learning the sword intent was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. It was a pity that Jiang and I, who was full of a sense of justice, did not become a heroine. She angrily said, "So shameless. Secretly learning from others." Su Fengnian closed his eyes and slowed down his movements. He was extremely slow. He was so slow that he could feel the qi in his body condensing in his right arm. He could even feel the slight trembling of his muscles. He then merged with the saber and finally concentrated at the tip of the saber. On Mount Wudong, when the ox-riding man taught him the unknown drawing circle fist technique, the first step was to break down the movements as light as the clouds and flowing like water. Su Fengnian practiced the swift saber. Therefore, when he read the Green Water Pavilion sword practice record on the mountain, it was all about swordsmanship. Although practicing the saber required speed, he also knew that slow saber was more difficult. Only in the end could he completely forget about fast and slow. There were no more moves in his heart, only a thought and a thought. Once the thought was moved, no matter if it was a saber or a sword, there would be no more worries. However, these were almost untraceable thoughts of the pavilion in the sky. How many martial artists in the world had practiced hundreds of thousands of sabers and millions of swords in order to reach this realm? When the tip of the saber was only an inch away from the ground, Su Fengnian suddenly exerted force. 1 saber was still a simple saber. Su Fengnian was somewhat regretful. He murmured, "Too hasty." Standing up and putting away the Spring Thunder Saber, Su Fengnian stretched and said self-deprecatingly, "No hurry, no hurry. I'll listen to old Huang. Rice has to be eaten 1 bite at a time." Jiang and I, who had thought that something would happen, found that it was all bark and no bite. She curled her lips. Su Fengnian saw her expression and laughed. "Are you laughing at me? You, a heroine who is about to learn swordsmanship from the God of Swords and is determined to become the new God of Swords, come and carry my saber. Let's not talk about embroidered winter. Just this 1.5 kilograms of spring thunder, if you can hold it horizontally for an incense stick's time, I'll take it that you've read 10,000 words." Jiang and I raised the sword manual in her hand and said heavily, "Are you listening or not? Even if you don't listen, I'll take it that I've read 3,000 words." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "I'm not listening today. I still have to draw more while I can remember. Go, I'll give you an extra 3,000 words." Jiang Ni's face was filled with disbelief. She was afraid that it would be another trap. After so many years of being taken advantage of and plotted against, she was already very scared. Ignoring Jiang Ni's thoughts, Su Fengnian walked into the house and continued to scold the Qi practitioners of Dragon Tiger Mountain while painstakingly drawing. This work was like practicing the slow saber. Every stroke required a lot of effort. The old God of Swords, Li Chungang, had walked into the courtyard. Jiang and I, who was having a headache about how to deal with the ancient inkstone, stopped and saw the old man walking to the place where Su Fengnian stabbed the saber. She stopped and looked down. The old man, who had nothing to do, was lured in by the last saber strike. Jiang and I looked for a while and left the courtyard when she saw that the old man was just in a daze. Li Chungang bent his back and squinted his eyes as he looked at the strange and thin cracks created by the last saber strike. He clicked his tongue and said, "What saber? Obviously, it's better to learn the sword." The old man tugged at the sheepskin coat. Once he tugged at it, the fur would fall off. He turned around and left. Yu Yuwei, who was carrying Wu Meinyang, stood further away. The old man glanced at the white cat and the white and plump beauty and mumbled, "There's something wrong with this brat's brain. It's fine if he doesn't eat the cat meat, but he doesn't even touch the little girl." Yu Yuwei was furious, but she didn't dare to say anything. Old man Li seemed to have lice or something in his crotch. He reached out and scratched it. It felt so comfortable. Fortunately, Yu Yuwei didn't see this scene. She walked straight into the courtyard and saw Su Fengnian concentrating on drawing something. She hesitated for a moment and prepared to go home quietly. She didn't have anything to do in the first place. It was just that she suddenly changed to a completely unfamiliar place and felt uncomfortable. Moreover, the small courtyard she was in was particularly serene and quiet. There were dozens of green bamboos planted in the courtyard. After reading so many novels and articles about immortals, foxes, and ghosts, she could always imagine that something would float out from the bamboo forest. Compared to the green bamboos, she still preferred the soft and beautiful banana trees. Weren't there many of them here? Before Yu Yuwei approached, Su Fengnian, who had switched his left hand from holding the brush to his right hand, asked with a smile, "What's the matter?" Yu Yuwei replied softly, looking at the banana trees. Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment. He joked, "I can't change the courtyard. My things are all here. However, if you like to look at the banana trees, I can get someone to pull out the big bushes in the courtyard and pile them up in your courtyard. How about that?" Yu Yuwei said shyly and angrily, "Okay." Su Fengnian snapped his fingers. The elusive blue bird stood beside Yu Yuwei. Su Fengnian said with a smile, "Get someone to move the banana trees." Yu Yuwei said, "No need." Then she angrily turned around. Even Wu Meinyang lazily stretched out her claws. Looking from the side, the claws slid across the round curve of Yu Yuwei's chest. Su Fengnian, who happened to catch this charming scene, was a little spellbound. Su Fengnian waved his hand, and Blue Bird retreated. Then he called out to Yu Yuwei and said with a smile, "Come, let's grind the ink." Yu Yuwei asked doubtfully, "Huh?" Su Fengnian stretched out his hand and pointed at the famous yellow inkstone on the table, saying, "You grind this." He then pointed at Yu Yuwei's chest and made a gesture of grinding back and forth. Su Fengnian said with a mischievous smile, "I'll grind this." Yu Yuwei's face flushed red. She pouted playfully, "Lecture." Looking at Yu Yuwei fleeing in panic, Su Fengnian leaned back in his chair. There wasn't a trace of lust in his eyes. He narrowed his beautiful phoenix eyes and turned to look out the window at the moon and sparse stars after the rain. Where is Su Xiao now? Chapter 105. Although Yingliang's county magistrate Jean Lanting was an official born from a local Bailiang family, he was more of a scholar than an official. He did not look forward to climbing up the ranks of the bureaucracy. He only wanted to climb high, write poems, raise geese, pick chrysanthemums, and sing many poems with Yongzhou's famous courtesans. However, when he heard that the king of Bailiang's eldest son, Su Fengnian, was going to stay in Yingliang, and his longtime friend, Uncle Zheng Hanhai, had given him such a big meat pie, Jean Lanting's heart was boiling with excitement. Yingliang was not like the other counties in Yongzhou. After all, it was a bit too close to Bailiang, so it could not be considered to be under the sole pillar of the dynasty. However, in the end, there were many things that required him to look up to Bailiang. To be able to be on good terms with His Royal Highness was a great thing. However, even though it was a good thing, Jean Lanting, who had a lot of mysophobia, still had the beauties in his family leave the residence under the pretext of going for a spring walk. If by any chance His Royal Highness, who had a terrible reputation, took a fancy to them, Jean Lanting was afraid that he would be suffocated to death by a few unexpected green hats. After arranging and cleaning the residence to perfection, Jean Lanting happily went 30 li outside the city to welcome the guests. However, a heavy rain doused Jean Lanting's fiery heart with ice-cold water. The group of people did not even see the shadow of His Royal Highness. When he returned to the city, he was blocked outside the courtyard by a maidservant. He was almost laughed to death by the group of martial artists led by Tang Yinshan. At the time, Yongzhou's secretary Zheng Hanhai, who was still wet from head to toe, could not keep his old face. He waved his sleeves and left on the spot. Jean Lanting also had the spirit of a scholar. Out of sight, out of mind, but this residence was his, so where could he go? Fortunately, the icy cold servant girl behind her took the opportunity to inquire about the old Wang Lin case, which was one of Jean Lanting's well-known anecdotes in Yongzhou. Immediately she had a good impression of His Royal Highness, who had a unique insight. The night was long, and Jean Lanting woke up with bloodshot eyes. However, the steward of the residence came early in the morning to complain that the oldest and strongest peach trees in the backyard had been chopped down. His Royal Highness servant girl said that the peach trees were of the best quality and wanted to use them to make a few peachwood swords. Jean Lanting, who was putting on his clothes, gritted his teeth and endured it, telling the steward to not get involved in this matter. However, without waiting for Jean Lanting to swallow his resentment, a small steward who specialized in raising white geese came howling in grief and sobbing. He complained to Jean Lanting about His Royal Highness' evil deeds of killing geese to roast meat. Jean Lanting clutched his chest. This weak scholar, who was quite famous for his poetry in Yongzhou, angrily turned around and took down an ancient sword that was hung on the wall as a decoration. His face turned purple, and he was about to fight it out with His Royal Highness. The two stewards saw that their master was about to lose his mind and did not care about offending their superior. They hurriedly blocked the figure of Jean Lanting. One of them grabbed the sword, the other grabbed the waist. Jean Lanting's body was as weak as a woman's. He struggled for a moment, then stomped his foot and threw the ancient sword that he had bought with a lot of money, which he had not unsheathed from its scabbard, to the ground. He sighed and was in a daze. Originally, he thought that his bad luck had come to an end. Who would have thought that a head maidservant would hastily rush into the courtyard and whisper that the two Furins had somehow been invited back to the residence? At this moment, they were roasting a goose together with His Royal Highness. After Jean Lanting heard the grievous news, he immediately fainted. Several servants hurriedly supported the county magistrate into the room in a fluster. That tall and handsome-looking His Royal Highness was truly a devil's fiend that seeing once was better than hearing 100 times a. After just one night of peace, the elegant and graceful Ingzhu Saburo Jean was already lying on a sickbed. The head steward thought for a bit and prepared to go find old Master Jean of the old residence to ask for a countermeasure. His Royal Highness did not seem to want to immediately leave Ingzhu. He could not possibly let him bring disaster to this residence. With great difficulty, the head steward waited until his master faintly woke up. Then he saw His Royal Highness maidservant standing outside the room and faintly said, "His Royal Highness wants Jean Lanting to first take a few knives and familiarize himself with them. He wants to teach the two Furins how to write cooking goose notes." The pitiful Jean Saburo was half dead as he shouted, "Zheng Hanhai harmed me," before fainting again. At the lakeside, His Royal Highness was in the middle of a shady business of burning the zither and cooking the crane. Just now, he had personally chased a flock of Jean Lanting's beloved white geese from the shore to the lake and made a deal with Jiang and I. Her rowing the boat was equivalent to reading a 1,000-word essay. Then, Su Fengyan used the wooden oar to skillfully knock out 2 of the fattest white geese and then carried them back to the shore. A good lake and a flock of geese had been disturbed until only the sound of the geese was left. On the shore, the 2 beautiful Furins who had been invited back to the residence early in the morning were speechless. One of them was slightly older and had the charm of a young married woman. She was a woman from a noble family in Yongzhou. The other had just entered the residence not long ago and was in the prime of her youth. Although she was young, her figure was slender where it should be and straight where it should be. She was a green and lovely person. Her identity and background were difficult to fathom. It was just that she was an unruly and romantic scholar. Within the dynasty, she had always been the talk of the peddlers and soldiers. A talented scholar and a beautiful woman. Even if another 1,000 years passed, it would still be a good thing. Which great literary master did not have a few close female confidants who could warm his bed and raise his face outside? Studying, being able to read 1,000 grains of rice and being able to read a jade-like beauty in bed was true ability. Unfortunately, these words were made up by His Royal Highness, who was roasting the goose, and could not be taken seriously. Su Fengnian was able to easily roast fish and roast sweet potatoes, let alone roast the goose that the two Furins were dumbfounded by. Other than ruining the white geese that this group of refined scholars liked to rear, he had someone lead Grandpa Wei to the peach orchard early in the morning to find good peach wood. It seemed that he was deliberately trying to make Jin Sanlang's bootlicking go wrong. Bluebird brought over a few pieces of cooked rice paper. Su Fengnian handed the roast goose job to Jiang and I, allowing her to earn a few dozen copper coins. She took out a piece of rice paper and wiped her hands. Seeing this, the two Furins felt a burst of heartache. Jin Sanlang was not stingy with money, but he was infatuated with these elegant things. The person in front of them was too different. Su Fengnian looked at the slightly older Furin, whose breasts and buttocks were naturally slightly larger. He smiled and asked, "What is the background of this Shu Xian? I have never seen it before, but it is very smooth to use. Fern, tell this Shitzi about it." Replying to His Royal Highness, this rice paper is called Lanting Xian. This humble concubine's husband personally went to Western Shu to pick out some sandalwood paper and gave it to a local household that had been making paper for generations. At first, they followed the ancient method and the paper was not heavy. My husband continuously improved it and added hemp into the pure bamboo pulp. Only then did this Lanting Xian printed with the words Lanting produced by Lanting appear. It is as white as snow and as soft as cotton. Nowadays, the scholars of Yongzhou all love this rice paper. Even the prefecture overseer praises it for being as soft as silk. A young woman was a young woman after all. Her courage was much greater than the young Furin. Although the woman was older and lacked the natural freshness and liveliness, the taste was like old wine. After being trained by a man, it was brewed bit by bit and had a special charm. Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and said, "Fern, is it really as white as snow and as soft as cotton? Isn't it? If His Royal Highness doesn't believe me, you'll know after you try it." The young woman appeared to be alarmed. She deliberately turned her head to avoid looking at Su Fengnian. She gently stared at the cooked rice paper. Her charming eyes were like silk. She did not look like a frightened reaction to being teased at all. Su Fengnian laughed in a low voice and said, "I tried the rice paper last night. Furin's words are not false, but there are some. Why don't you try it tonight?" The corners of the young woman's mouth curled up. She remained silent. Everything was understood without words. As a young lady from a landowning household, her bearing and magnanimity in the ways of the world was naturally not something that the young Furin, who could not even be called a pretty girl from a humble family, could compare to. Moreover, the young Furin was too preoccupied with her fear to notice the vulgar and amorous words that Su Fengnian spoke while looking at Lu Furin's chest. The young Furin was only afraid that His Royal Highness would abduct her into the courtyard during the day and do those embarrassing things to her. He was Su Rentu's biological son. As a military officer, he was a prince with a different surname. As a civil official, he had the title of Pillar of the Nation. He had the two most glorious identities of the dynasty. If His Royal Highness really broke the law and committed crimes, what would she do? Sanlang must have heard the news long ago, but he had not shown himself. Did that mean he had tacitly agreed? What should she do? The young Furin's heart raced. She stole a glance at the young and handsome His Royal Highness. On his waist hung a pair of beautifully matched blades. His figure was tall and slender. Compared to Sanlang, he was much more confident and at ease. Moreover, his body was much more sturdy. If she was held in His Royal Highness's arms and pressed under his body. Thinking of this, the young Furin, who felt ridiculous and embarrassed, felt her face burn. She lowered her head, not daring to look at the handsome young master who seemed to be able to make her commit a mistake with just a glance. Jiang and I listened to Su Fengyan flirting with the shameless old woman and did not feel anything. This was the style of the great idiot of Baoyang, Su Xiaoyan. If he had always been that Su Fengyan who was obsessed with blades, she would have felt unfamiliar. The old god of swords had arrived at the lakeside at some point. He took a skewer of half-cooked roasted goose and stuffed it into his mouth. After chewing a few mouthfuls, he was somewhat surprised at Su Fengyan's experience. He gave a rare compliment. "Kid, don't use your blade to scare Jiang and I. Change your profession and open a roasted meat shop. I guarantee that business will be prosperous." Su Fengyan dismissed it with a laugh. He was used to this old man's dog mouth. Nothing good came out of it. Chapter 106. Zhao Ningyun, one of the top disciples of Mount Longhu's Ning generation, said darkly, "Little bald donkey, how dare you pretend to be a monk of the two Zen temples? You're asking for a beating." After Zhao Ningyun finished speaking, he brazenly attacked the north and south little monk. Moreover, his words were quite mysterious. He first threw down a big hat and attacked without giving you a chance to explain. He did not seriously injure or cripple you, but only taught you a lesson and vented the anger in his heart. In the future, if this little monk was really a monk of the two Zen temple, it would just be a misunderstanding. Zhao Ningyun was very clever, but he did not expect the little monk and the little girl to reach the gate of the Taoist master's residence without any obstruction. The little monk stood in front of his beloved little girl and did not intend to fight back. He was here to talk to the Taoist master on the mountain, not to fight. Besides, fighting had never been his strong point. The little monk's skills were only trivial things like washing clothes, cooking, covering for his master, and picking rouge for his master's wife. A breeze brushed past Zhao Ningyun's palm attack. Miss Li Zi saw a young Taoist holding a horsetail whisk walk out of the grand gate of the Taoist master's residence. He used a boxwood hairpin to tie his hair into a bun. His Taoist robe was not the yellow-purple of the Taoist master's residence. It was no different from the ordinary Taoist temple at the foot of the mountain. He wore a pair of white and shabby hemp shoes. If he did not walk out of the Taoist master's residence in the celestial capital, with his old-fashioned face and shabby attire, even pilgrims would not approach him. The Taoist priest, who was no more than 30 years old, lightly waved his white tail whisk. It was the inconspicuous aureole seizing the tail of the 16 styles of Mount Longhu's horsetail whisk. He easily wiped out Zhao Ningyun's attack. On the battlefield, it was best to avoid those brave men with halberds. When it came to Jianghu, if you met a monk or a Taoist who used a horsetail whisk, you should be careful regardless of your age. The horsetail whisk in your hand was extraordinary. This was a warning passed down from generation to generation by the older generation of Jianghu people. The Wudong sect leader Wang Zhonglo broke a river with a finger. Then there was the legend of Mount Longhu where Taoist Master Zhao once broke 160 imperial guards with a horsetail whisk. When Zhao Ningyun met the solemn Taoist priest who was a generation older than him, he immediately put on a cheeky smile and lowered his eyelids. "Uncle, I'm just joking with the little monk." The Taoist priest ignored his nephew, Zhao Ningyun. He bowed slightly to the little monk in a light red cassock and said stiffly, "Please follow me." The little monk turned his head to look at the east and west. After getting permission, he took the lead and walked into the Taoist master's residence. After entering the main door, he found that there was another door behind the first one. On the white jade floor, there was a huge 8 trigrams Tai Chi diagram. It was full of the mysteries of heaven, which made people feel reverence. The 2 doors were as imposing as the main door. The dragon and tiger bow their heads to the Taoist master, and the ghost and god admire their virtue. Unfortunately, Su Xiao said that he would press down the dragon and tiger's head at the foot of the mountain. In the eyes of some people, this couplet was suspected of slapping the face of the Taoist master's residence. Inside the second door, there was a bell tower with a hanging bell of 9,999 pounds. After the bell tower, there was a magnificent double-eave jade emperor hall. It was the tallest and largest among all the Taoist temples and palaces in Longhu Mountain. There was a statue of the Jade Emperor and 12 heavenly monarchs on both sides of the hall. The 8 golden dragons, which were only one less than the 9 dragons of the Son of Heaven, were coiled in the middle of the hall. They were so lifelike that it seemed that they could fly away with a light touch. The little girl looked up and was very nervous. She followed the little Taoist master and the stupid Nan Nan through the corridor of ancient tablets. Finally, they came to the third door. If they took another step, they would enter the private inner door of the Taoist master's residence. Only emperors, generals, and ministers of the secular world could have such treatment. However, the Taoist horsetail whisk who was called Uncle by Zhao Ningyun did not stop. He led the little girl and the little monk in. There were 10 vermilion words on the wall of the courtyard: unparalleled land of the south, the first house on the left of the river. The little girl saw the horizontal words, immortal capital of the Xiang country, above her head and secretly stuck out her tongue. She did not feel that it was very impressive when she looked outside, but after entering the Taoist master's residence, even she had to admit that it was indeed much more magnificent than her own home. Even if she did not have the happy scene of rowing boats and watching the red carp jump in the Bailiang Palace, alas, those abbot at home who only knew how to eat and drink did not know how to repair the temple. After all, her home was the first holy land of Buddhism. The third door was divided into 3 halls. At the back of the front hall, there was a round green jade stone that could not be held round by 2 hands. It was called the welcoming and sending stone. The Taoist master would stop here to welcome the distinguished guests of the residence. The Taoist master led the 2 to the hall in one breath and let the 2 rare guests sit down. 2 delicate and pretty Taoist children served tea. In the hall, there were portraits of the first 3 generations of Dragon Tiger Mountain. In the middle of the hall was the first generation of the Taoist master's residence, Zhao Lingzuan. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking like a celestial being. There was a couplet hanging on the wall: "What is there to be like? Discipline the demons and evils to retreat." To the left and right were the second and third generation of the Taoist master, Zhao Chuyu and Zhao Jiqing. One was sitting with a sword and the other was standing with a horsetail whisk. The Taoist master with the horsetail whisk, who looked very similar to the third generation of the Taoist master, waited for the 2 to sit down and said calmly, "I'll go and ask the Taoist master to come out of seclusion." Come out of seclusion? That meant the Taoist master Pai Gu was in seclusion. No matter how ignorant the young lady was, she was not stupid enough to trouble the Taoist master of the Zhao family to come out of seclusion to welcome guests. She hurriedly waved her hand and blushed slightly. She smiled awkwardly and said, "Taoist master, there's no need to trouble the Taoist master. Let's just drink some tea and then go down the mountain." The Taoist master was probably a stubborn person. He said calmly, "It's fine." Chapter 107. The little monk was the exact opposite of the little girl. He was always muddle-headed when it came to small matters. Every day, he would be scolded as an idiot by the little girl's family of 3. After being a monk for a few years, he had worked like an ox or a horse for a few years. But for some reason, he was magnanimous when it came to important matters. He clasped his hands and said, "This little monk will talk about Zen with you." The Daoist priest smiled for the first time and slowly said, "You know how to talk about Zen, but I don't know how to preach. If you don't mind, I can call Mr. White Lotus out and talk to the master." The little monk respectfully said, "Okay." The little girl's face was taut and she didn't dare to say or laugh. In fact, she was already happy in her heart. Look, although stupid North and South was stupid, he could still hold up his face in some situations. She knew the name of Mr. White Lotus. He was Bai Yu, who was bestowed with a purple robe by the emperor. Years ago, it was this Daoist priest who won the argument on the top of the lotus. When he returned to the temple, he was so angry that he didn't even smile when he saw her. It was a pity that her father only cared about drinking and was punished by her mother to not leave the mountain for a whole year. Otherwise, it was hard to say who would win and who would lose. Stupid North and South couldn't even win an argument. Naturally, he couldn't win an argument with this Mr. White Lotus. But it didn't matter. If he lost, he could find an opportunity to bring Su Fengnian here. Su Fengnian always quarreled with the shrewish village girl. This unknown Daoist priest was much more polite than Zhao Ningyun. He really went to the back hall to call for Mr. White Lotus, who was said to be more arrogant than Mount Longhu. The little girl had just finished a cup of tea when the Daoist priest brought a man in white. Probably because his eyes were damaged from reading too many books, he walked very carefully and habitually narrowed his eyes. His eyes weren't big to begin with, so when he narrowed them, they became a slit. However, he had a very nice and warm smile on his face, which was quite similar to Su Fengnian. The little girl felt comfortable looking at him and immediately felt that this Mr. White Lotus was a good person. Father said that there would always be good people who were better than her and bad people who were worse than her at the foot of the mountain. If she met a good person, she should be polite, but if she met a bad person, she should run away. If that was the case, then the person called Zhao Ningyun outside the Celestial Master's residence was definitely a bad person, and this white Daoist and the one with the horsetail whisk could be considered good people. Therefore, the little girl stood up and respectfully greeted him, calling him Mr. White Lotus. Mr. White Lotus, who was not wearing a Daoist robe, first bowed to the little monk from afar. When he walked a few steps closer, he saw the little girl's face clearly. He smiled and said, "Miss, you look like a blessing to your husband. Whoever becomes your husband in the future will have a great fortune." The little girl's face instantly turned red. What should he do? As the saying goes, one does not hit a smiling person. This Mr. White Lotus is really too straightforward. He is even more open than she is. The Daoist priest with the horsetail whisk smiled and said helplessly, "Mr. White Lotus, don't scare the little girl." Mr. White Lotus, who wore the carefree bandana on his head, reached out to touch his bandana and felt a little ashamed. He slowly sat down on a purple bamboo chair and turned his head to look at the little monk who was coming to the Taoist master mansion to talk about a Zen. The young monk did not seem to have any intention of debating. All he did was ask curiously, "This place is called Fox Immortal Hall. Is there really a fox immortal?" Mr. White Lotus shook his head and said, "No." The little monk said, "Are there any immortals in Mount Longhu?" Mr. White Lotus laughed and said, "I don't think so." The little monk nodded and said, "Then I have no questions." Mr. White Lotus was not disappointed or angry. He was really good-tempered. The little girl felt that the people at the foot of the mountain were not completely right. Mr. White Lotus was not arrogant at all. He was a very amiable uncle. The little Taoist master of Mount Longhu, who was regarded as an amiable uncle by the little girl, smiled and said, "Drink tea, drink tea." The little girl said softly, "After drinking tea, we will go down the mountain." It was hard to imagine that Mr. White Lotus, who once talked to the emperor in the palace, nodded and said, "I have no sense of direction and my eyes are not good. I won't be seeing you off. When the time comes, I will have to trouble this bad-tempered junior brother Chi to help me bring you back." The little girl finished her tea and left the hall with the little monk. She walked out of the door in one breath. At the bottom of the stairs, she let out a long breath and patted her chest. The little monk touched his bald head. It was all sweaty. The little girl said jokingly, "Stupid Nanbei, are you afraid too?" The little monk blushed and said, "I'm not afraid of quarreling. I'm just afraid of being beaten after the door is closed." In the hall, junior brother Chi asked, "Did you guys talk about Zen?" Baiyu lowered his head and drank his tea. He said, "Probably not." The old-fashioned Taoist priest said, "Oh." Baiyu joked, "What's the point of quarreling? Look, I'm in a good mood to drink tea. Isn't that better than anything else? An unintelligent little girl and a smart little monk. Isn't that great Zen?" The little Taoist priest frowned and said, "You know I don't understand this." Baiyu smiled and said, "Being in a daze is the way of heaven. Being ignorant is Zen. If you don't understand, you understand. If you understand, you don't understand. Do you understand? I think you don't." The Taoist priest with the surname Chi was still expressionless. He asked, "Grandpa Shituan said that the money needed to repair Xiaoyao Temple should be paid by the Taoist priest's residence. In the future, if anyone from Bailiang comes up the mountain, the Taoist priest's residence will be the one to receive them. However, the sect master is in seclusion. The one in the capital also said to ignore this matter. What do you think?" Mr. White Lotus smiled and said, "Let it be. If it's too much, we'll just have another farce of a horse trampling on dragons and tigers. I like excitement. Anyway, you'll be at the front of the fighting. In a few years, you'll be one floor higher than our sect master. By then, Who will you be weaker then? The Taoist priest was silent. Mr. White Lotus squinted his eyes and looked at the portraits of the 3 ancestral Taoist priests. He sighed and said, "Let's talk about it. If I jinx it, it won't be easy to deal with it. The Su family has a phoenix, and the horse tramples on dragons and tigers. This is a prophecy in the heavenly book.